Good evening, committee. For those watching on the webcast, my name is Councillor Frost and I'm the chair of this committee. Facing me to the left and to the right of the room are the committee members. There are no planned fire alarm tests this evening, so if we hear the fire bell, please make your way out of the building. The nearest fire exit is through this door here and to the left, to the rear, okay, or alternatively to the rear of the room and then out through potentially the main entrance if that's not blocked. Okay, we will reassemble in the War Memorial Park. We've got 4 items of business tonight. The first one is to choose a recommendation 1 of 3 on a report about the housing and homelessness strategy, giving our views to the portfolio holder. Second item of business is to review and comment on an updated form of words proposed by a report regarding maintaining amenities and green spaces in response to a motion to full council. And 3, to receive an update note on the recommendations of the EPH Committee on the Water Cycle Study from a meeting on the 1st of September 2023. And 4, to review and note a committee recommendation tracker. In order to get through tonight's business in a timely manner and to give all members an opportunity to comment, I will be initially restricting members to 1 comment or question per section. If members have asked their question and wish to have a supplementary, I would then want that member to ask me as chair, otherwise I'll move on to the next questioner. If there is time and all members have been given an opportunity to comment, I will then ask members for more questions. If you run out of the allocated time for that section, then I'll advise the committee to stop the questions and ask for recommendations to the portfolio holder. We'll then move on to the next item of business, or the next section. Before we start, I just want to share my plan and timings for tonight with the committee. Agenda item number 5, okay, I reckon will take us about 1 hour. Okay, after the introduction by the portfolio holder, I intend to go through the section 3 and review and comment on the key issues for consideration, starting in section 3.1, looking at the successes of the current housing and homelessness strategy, okay, starting on page 15 of tonight's paper, and I've allocated that 10 minutes. I then want to review and comment on the development since 2020 in the report section 3.2 on page 17, again 10 minutes, followed by a review and comment on the consultation section 3.3, 10 minutes. And then followed by questions and comments on the updated priorities report, section 3.4, page 19, again another 10 minutes. And then look at report section 4, moving forward and monitoring the strategy, which is on page 22, again 10 minutes. I then want to finally consider with this paper the options on report section 5, the options analysis on page 22, where I'd like to hear the committee's views as to which of the 3 options we recommend to the portfolio holder. Then moving on to agenda item number 6 in front of the committee, maintaining amenities and green spaces. I want to allocate 35 minutes in total. We've got a speaker, Councillor Vaux, who will take 4 minutes. Then after a brief introduction from the portfolio holder, I'd like to start asking for questions on section 2, page 55. I've allocated 5 minutes, okay, and then another 5 minutes on the current wording, which is in section 3 on page 56. Okay, before moving on to section 4, the new proposed updated wording, okay, which on page 55, which I'd like to spend 10 minutes, okay, and also on appendix 2, 10 minutes, before finally spending 5 minutes or so looking at appendix 3 on page 64 before recommendations to the portfolio holder. Agenda item number 7 is to review and note an update note on the recommendations to the committee regarding the review of the water cycle study on the 1st of September 22, and I've allocated 35 minutes for that section. We have 2 speakers with us, that's Jackie Brown and also Dave George. They'll both have 2 minutes each, and then we'll move on to the to questions and on the update note. And then finally, agenda item 8 is to review and note the committee recommendation tracker, and I've allowed 15 minutes on that, and then we review the work programme. If we stick to all those timings, we should finish about 9:30. Okay, so looking at the current agenda, excuse me. Okay, agenda item 1, apologies and substitutions. Okay, I have some apologies. Okay, I have apologies from Councillor Robinson and also Councillor Peter. Do we have any apologies from the other side? No. Substitutions, I have apologies from Councillor Rattigan, and he is substituted tonight by Councillor Katechka. Okay, welcome Samir. Okay, you're always welcome to the committee. good to see you. Okay, does anybody else have any more absence, apologies and substitutions? No? And yes, Councillor James. Okay, just to answer your statement, yes. Okay, so does anybody have any declarations of interest? No? Okay, so please be aware you can make a declaration of interest at any time through the meeting. Okay, so moving on to item number 3, urgent matters. Okay, does anybody have any urgent matters? I haven't been advised of any. No? Great, okay. Minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of January, I have them here, okay, in front of me. Does anybody have any comments on accuracy regarding these minutes? No? In that case, what I'd like to do is I'd like to move that those are an accurate record of the meeting. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Councillor Koneshko. Yes, thank you very much. Okay, is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. I'll sign those at the end of the meeting. Okay, moving on to item number 5. Okay, with the housing and homelessness strategy review. Okay, what I'd like to do is I'd like to invite the cabinet member, Councillor Samuel Carr, to introduce the report. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Chair. I have brought this paper to you, and I suppose you could say it's earlier than built. So when we first looked at our housing and homelessness strategy, it was before I was a member of this Borough Council, and we unanimously agreed our 2020 to 2024 document, and it was an aspirational, excellent piece of work that I think, when you look at the successes later on in the paper, has borne fruit. This is an administration, this is a council that has developed a nationally significant, nationally recognised social inclusion partnership that has seen rough sleeping plummet in this borough, and that has seen successes on the homelessness side as well. It is notable that on Tuesday, figures were published by the government's own Homeless Link document, which showed that nationally, unfortunately, rough sleeping is up about 26%. However, in this borough, we've not seen any increase. And I think that is testament to the work that we as a council are doing. So why have we brought this paper to you earlier than built? I took the view that there have been a number of changes over the course of the last few years that I think are material to our housing and homelessness strategy. And I've set those out for you in the forward. First and foremost, we don't want to rest on successes at any stage. We always want to consider and reflect upon the service that we're providing in the homelessness reduction field. And we have identified a number of areas where we can improve the service that we provide to residents. But second, there is a need for our strategy to reflect some of the economic, government policy and legislative changes that we've seen since the publication of our first document in 2020. Most notable, of course, the publication of the Domestic Abuse Act, which places a number of duties on local government, and I think we want to be more aspirational and proactive in the service we provide in the housing and homelessness field. Similarly, this council has taken upon itself a number of obligations and aspirations on the policy side. So, for example, we're seeking accreditation with the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance, and we have secured our accreditation with White Ribbon, but we want to make sure that the service we're providing reflects those new corporate positions. And similarly, there have been learnings as part of the recently approved council plan and, of course, our recent LGA review. And finally, it's very important to me personally that our housing and homelessness service reflects our aspirations on climate change and on regeneration. And one of the things you'll note when you read through the paper is that we've moved away from a quite woolly language about place shaping, which was the previous priority in the last strategy, to, I think, a more definitive, clearer, more aspirational and directional policy in regard to regeneration. So my hope tonight is that you'll recognise this is not a fundamental rewrite of our approach. This reaffirms many of our commitments to the vulnerable, to preventing homelessness and tackling rough sleeping, but it also delivers some key policy anchors that will allow this Borough Council to go further with the service that it provides to residents. Finally, what I would note is that there are a number of key areas where this council is going further through this strategy. So notably, we are placing a greater emphasis on social rent as part of affordable delivery. I think it's important to recognise that affordable homes in Basingstoke are not as affordable as we'd like them to be. And so our response through this strategy is to place new emphasis on social rent, and that is a theme that I think we will start seeing throughout our various documentations. Equally, this strategy envisages the creation of a preferred partnership model to improve our relationships with our social housing providers, and it recognises a number of changes, notably the obligations placed on us by government in relation to sort of persons from abroad and those various schemes that are in operation from Afghanistan to Ukraine, and equally legislative changes with regard to first homes. So I very much hope to hear your views on the strategy tonight. I think my sense, looking at this portfolio, was that doing nothing, sitting on the previously approved strategy, wasn't really a meaningful option, given how different 2023 is to 2020. And I feel that going for a complete rewrite would not recognise the significant benefits that our previous strategy has delivered. So I think we have an optimal middle position where we can reaffirm our commitments and go further where needed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Okay, just going on to section 3, looking at the successes of the current housing and homelessness strategy. Okay, page 15 of tonight's paper. Does anybody have any questions? Councillor Cubitt.
Yes, hello, good evening, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the portfolio holder. I'd just like to ask a question about his introduction and summary, actually, because I suppose you've outlined why you are bringing this to us and what is being done and how you're aligning it with the new council plan and improving on the domestic abuse support. But I just wondered in a nutshell, what have you improved, just before we go into the paper, what have you improved with regards to this strategy as a direct result of the new council plan, please?
Thank you, Councillor Cubitt, for your question. I think the themes that we put forward in our council plan are commendable, and I think I was pleased to see council endorse them earlier. So most notably, the themes in the council plan on regeneration, I think, are quite clear in the new plan that we're putting forward to you in the strategy. So as I said, we're moving away from a relatively vague previous strategy point on place shaping, and we've moved in response to the council plan towards a quite definitive view on regeneration as a means to improve affordable housing. And so that, I think, is in a nutshell, one key method.
Thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Konesko, please.
Thank you, Chair. A detailed question on big page 16, little page 6 of 15 on the table where we're looking at our notable achievements and successes. Under homelessness and rough sleeping, there are a couple of bullet points there about B&B use, and a couple of questions that come out of that. One is how much of the B&B usage is outside of the borough, and particularly for some of the families who are homeless and who obviously have children who, if they are taken outside the borough, will need to be schooled outside the borough and all the disruption that causes. And secondly, it talks of minimal use of B&B for 6+ week families. And what do we exactly mean by minimal? Thank you.
Thank you. I can get a written answer in terms of the actual breakdown of the families with children that have been placed in B&B and where those placements have been. I think it's worth noting that the numbers of households approaching us with families with children and the numbers being placed in B&B as a consequence are very, very few. And also that the average amount of time that people are spending in bed and breakfast, and this will follow through in the figures, I apologise, I don't have them with me tonight, is a very short period of time. You know, we are talking that less than 6 weeks for the majority of cases that we're placing, and where we have exceeded that requirement, it's been literally by a matter of days, and there have been exceptional circumstances around those cases, and that is really a buck against the national trend, where there have been lots of families with children in bed and breakfast for significant periods of time. So I can certainly follow that up in terms of a written answer to you. And in terms of minimal, the reason why a strategy and targets within a strategy, it's helpful to use phrases like optimal and minimal is the minute you use a widget, it becomes a very fixed measure which doesn't necessarily relay the context with which we're operating for the whole the whole 12 months of the year. So we've also talked at performance panel with members around not wanting to have a target that drives the service delivery. So if my team, for example, are dealing with homeless families, the driver for them should not be we have a target and we've exceeded that target. So that's why we say minimal, and the way that we excuse me, the way that we manage the operational delivery of that service as a management team is robustly to review every single case that's in bed and breakfast. What's the plan for it? How quickly will they move? So that's what we mean by minimal. So giving members the assurance that we are actually and actively ensuring that people stay in bed and breakfast for as least time as possible. I would say I think the situation is slightly different for single people that don't have children. I think there is a realisation that some use of bed and breakfast isn't unhealthy as it may have previously been portrayed. For some, you know, for some cases, an emergency provision of bed and breakfast where it can be found is quite positive. And the majority of cases that we've placed in bed and breakfast during the year have been for single people to make sure that they're not sleeping on the streets.
Thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Watts, please.
Thank you, Chair. Portfolio holder, you mentioned in your statement to Councillor Cubitt that in the council plan, regeneration was at the fore of the council plan, and in that council plan he mentioned Southam and Buckskin Ward, where the aspiration is to have a vision. We had a meeting with Sovereign on Monday, senior officers at Sovereign based in Hampshire, and they haven't even discussed it at board level at national. So we seem to be way behind the curve, and they're not. It's not on the agenda at the moment. So I wonder if we can have a bit of a backdate on that, please. And also we talk about May Place. We're not going for a new modern building now, and we're going to regeneration. Have we given up plans to find a new multi-purpose place for the homeless hostel? Thank you.
Lovely, Councillor Watts. I'll pick up those 2 points, and then I'll let Kate pick up again on the second with regard to your May Place question. So with regard to regeneration of Basingstoke West, it's very much a top priority for me. I think it's really clear that it's an area that needs investment, that would benefit from investment. And you know, what I can assure you as a council is that I've had several meetings over the course of last year and then several further this year discussing how this could be achieved with Sovereign and other partners. As can be appreciated, there would need to be a wide number of public sector partners involved as well as Sovereign. And naturally, Basingstoke West, Buckskin and Southam is a more complicated geography by virtue of some homes being owned, some homes being social housing. It is not entirely one or the other, and then there are various within that other partners involved in terms of land ownership. So it is more complicated, but what I can assure you is that the Borough Council and you know, myself personally, we view ourselves as the key sort of convening power to make this happen, to bring everyone to the table. On the specific point about Sovereign, no, the board would not have approved a vision or a strategy at board level at this stage. You know, we've been talking to various people at sub-board level on this, and I think it's fair to say that Sovereign have recently gone through a restructure that has affected their personnel delivering on this point. But we do want to get it to Cabinet at this point. We want to get it to Council. We want to get it to Sovereign's board. So there's a determination to get this done because we recognise with you, Councillor Watts, that this is a really, really important strategic priority as reflected in our council plan. It's complicated, but we're determined to make it work. On the second point, we very much recognise the importance of single homelessness as an issue. We've recognised in various reports that single person homelessness is the largest area of homelessness in the borough. I have to say, when I came into the portfolio in May of last year, one of my first actions was to visit Maid Place House because I was very conscious. You know, I think in this job you need to see to understand the service that you provide. And I went round the facility and I wasn't really content with the service that is being provided. There's a great deal of improvement to the physical building there, both in terms of standards of accommodation, but also how those services are delivered. You know, our colleagues at Two Saints do want to see a number of physical changes to improve service provision. So that is ongoing. That is a conversation that we are having right now. We've got past blueprint stages. We are now into those more complicated conversations about how it is delivered, but I can assure you it will be delivered. In terms of the previous proposals for 180 Culver Road, I think this council made its view known on that. And in response, my view was the easiest way to quickly improve the service for single person homelessness was to improve the facility at Maid Place. That doesn't mean to say at all that if an opportunity presented itself, we could then pursue a homelessness hostel facility, but that opportunity has not yet presented itself. But Kate, did you want to add anything to that?
I think that summarises the position perfectly. After the planning permission was refused at Culver Road, the options were, do we find somewhere else or do we look at what we've got? And to be honest, I think one of the drivers initially for an alternative site was an assumption that there was nothing very much you could do with May Place internally. Actually, we've been able to, with an architect, take a fresh pair of eyes to the building, and actually there is a lot of scope in there. We're really excited about the plans that we've drawn up. So because we don't own the building, we commission the service, but we don't deliver that service. There are a number of ducks that need to be lined up, but that is such a strategic priority. Following Culver Road, in terms of single homelessness, a new May Place, even if that's within the current May Place, is really high up on the agenda.
Thank you very much. Okay, finally, because we're almost out of time for this section, Councillor James, please.
Can I just pick up on the point before I ask my questions around the bed and breakfast? How are we still sending people out of area? And if we are, is it possible that you could give us maybe send us some sort of pictures and images of where the bed and breakfast is and what facilities they have within the rooms or access to? And are we sending families out of area? But my question really was tonight is about empty homes in this section. If you, I'm concerned, I've raised this in scrutiny, but I am concerned that the whole KPIs around empty homes has now gone. It says here that you have an empty homes working group. What happens to that information, and could we have detail, please, of how many empty homes we have, what the breakdown of how long those empty homes have been in relation to 6 months, a year, or the ones that have been longer than, because obviously I have some in my ward that have been longer than 5 years. So if you could, but thank you.
Shall I pick up with the bed and breakfast? I'm fairly confident that the majority of cases, other than for safety reasons, of families with children were accommodated within the borough, with a caveat that I will check that. There may have been 1 or 2 cases that slipped through. I mean, there have been less than 20 this year, so we're talking very, very small numbers. It's easier to place families with children into bed and breakfast within the borough now because bed and breakfast establishments will take our bookings. They will not take them for single people. We're having to make those placements out of borough, which is why there's so much emphasis on getting people back into the borough as quickly as possible, and the importance of somewhere like May Place and keeping that place turning over. In terms of giving photos, it's probably best to suggest that you look online at Premier Inn and places like that, because we use the chain hotels for placing single people. On the whole, I think very, very few. We may have used Basingstoke Country Hotel from time to time, but primarily the majority of placements are within the big chains. So there's.
Is that out of area as well?
They may be or may not. I mean, some of the placements we've made for single people, as I say, if we contact and try to make the booking, we can't make the booking because it's from Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council. We've therefore done a lot of work with Julian House, who can make an alternative booking, and their bookings tend to be accepted. So it varies according to whether or not they can get placements as well. We do try to keep people within the borough, but if we do have to place them outside of the borough, we do ensure that there is support from our outreach service and from other services to them. But the amount of time people are spending in bed and breakfast is not long. In terms of empty homes, there is a KPI in relation to empty homes, but it's not an empty homes target per se, in the sense that because and following the map that we did, which I think was around 2017, which you were part of, there was the whole range of work that was done around some of those empty homes, and we remain under the national average for numbers of empty homes that are empty for long periods of time. Tom's probably the expert. I can pass to Tom on that. But just in terms of where that KPI is, the indicator that looks at the number of private properties that are brought into use for homelessness is sprung from the original empty home properties, empty home KPIs. So where the KPI used to say numbers of properties brought back into use, it now reads as number of private sector placements, because those private sector placements are being made into homes that are otherwise empty.
Thank you very much.
Did you
okay.
want the average?
If it is very, very quick, because we're out of time and I've denied 2 questioners, okay, time. So if it's in the next 30 seconds, then fine.
Okay, yeah, very quickly then. So the Empty Homes Working Group convenes on a quarterly basis, so that's ourselves and Environmental Health and Council Tax. So we don't have the exact numbers, but we are, well, I don't have them to hand, but I can get them for you, but we are below the national average and the regional average for the number of empty homes in the borough. And the working group does work to kind of tackle those empty properties with complex issues, and that could be for various reasons in terms of properties going through probate process, or kind of establishing contact with owners, and where we have limited enforcement due to kind of no debt owed to the council. And we have recently, or just about to bring the Vibles Farm cottages homes back into use, which have been empty for 5-6 years. So I think I've exceeded 30 seconds there, sorry.
Thank you very much, Tom. If you can give a written answer as well to the actual number of empty homes, I think that would be well appreciated. Okay, I'm sorry, committee, but we're out of time on that. Okay, and I apologise to those members who I've had to refuse to have to speak on this section. I'd now like to move to section 3.2, which is on page 17, and we have 10 minutes on that. Councillor Cubitt, followed by Councillor McCormick.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Kate, your department is really outstanding. The dealings that I've had with your department in relation to cases has been really exemplary. So I can't thank you enough for that. However, I have to say, and I would like to hear from the Cabinet member on this, that there have been some significant changes as I see it. Maybe other members will agree with me. When comparing measuring successes from the outset of the original strategy in 2020 and what is now going to be measured going forward. And the Cabinet member touched on it, but he kind of swerved a couple of balls because, and Councillor Watts kind of tried to probe, and I tried to probe. So the Cabinet member said that in view of the change in the council plan, regeneration is now being more clearly explained and that it will be Winklebury. But nowhere in this paper does it make any reference to Buckskin or South Ham in the undertakings or in the measured successes. So I think Councillor Watts is completely fair and right to raise it, and I'm not sure you've answered that. So whilst it might be complex, it's no more complex than Oakridge was when we as a council had a very successful regeneration. And I believe, and there are others here that were here at that time who can confirm that there were mixed houses in Oakridge where some properties were private, some were housing associations. So they weren't insurmountable. And we were supposed to have been dealing with regeneration from 2020. So we failed to meet those outcomes that we undertook to take. And our successes and our strategic outcomes clearly indicate that we've lost 5 years. The same is true of May Place, because there was an undertaking, and again we've touched on this, that we will deliver a new fit-for-purpose emergency single homeless hostel. We all know the background of Culver Road, we all know about the planning, but nonetheless we failed to deliver a new fit-for-purpose emergency single homeless hostel. Finally, just these are 3 issues. I could go on a lot longer in terms of what's not on track, that was on track, that was part of a strategy that doesn't seem to have met its outcomes. And I'm not blaming the officers at all. It's clear to me it looks like a political decision not to proceed. But the other very significant change was that we had an undertaking to eradicate by 2024 rough sleeping. Now, Kate's touched on targets not being useful because they can skew activities of very well departments, and I completely understand that. But nonetheless, somebody politically in the Cabinet has made a decision, 1, to limit regeneration to Winklebury, 2, not to build a new fit-for-purpose emergency single homeless hostel, and 3, not to eradicate by 2024 rough housing. And I'd like an explanation as to why those metrics of success, as outlined in our original housing strategy of 2020-2024, and in our metrics as outlined in the Measuring Success and Monitoring Report of 2021-2022, and of course we're now in 2023. So, a Cabinet member, I'd like your answer to those 3 points, please.
Lovely, thank you, Councillor Cubitt. On regeneration, the language that's been used in the report is Basingstoke West, but we could very easily refer to Buckskin and South Ham in the paperwork. Basingstoke West is just a terminology that had been used internally between Sovereign and ourselves, but we can very easily change that to Buckskin and South Ham. Those geographies are coterminous. In terms of the allegation of failure, I would note that we have brought forwards with our partners in Vivid and various other public sector organisations a £60 million regeneration scheme for Winklebury, which is currently pending for planning. So I don't think necessarily her view holds with the facts on the ground. It obviously remains for development control to come to a view on that. Obviously, I would prefer that to be passed for the benefit of the people of Winklebury. On her second point with regard to a fit-for-purpose single homelessness hostel, my predecessor, Councillor Robinson Jr., obviously brought forward a proposal at 180 Culver Road. This council chose not to approve that through development control. And given that there are no sites that are obviously immediately to hand for that, My view is that we want to deliver improvements to May Place House, and those conversations are ongoing, and I hope to make announcements not too long from now. But given that, we want to make improvements now in the interim, and I think that's a good thing to do. But we as a council are open to any and all suggestions from members about sites that could provide a single person alternative. Naturally, that would need to go through the planning permission stage, and it would need the cooperation of the council to deliver it. On the point about eradicating rough sleeping, that absolutely remains the priority of this council. And I think that our figures do demonstrate that we're making great progress on that. I've no problem at all in reinstating the for 2024. I think perhaps in the drafting stage that may have fallen off, but that will definitely go back on the document by the time it gets to Cabinet. I've no objection to that. This has gone through many eyes, of course, and I'm very happy to ensure that that goes back in. Did you want to add anything, Kate?
Yeah.
No, you've actually been. The actual thing is to ask me as chair, okay, and I actually have the ability to allow a supplementary question or not. The fact is that we've used, okay, on your one question, 60% of the allotted time. I'd like to give another councillor, okay, Councillor McCormick.
But this is a follow-up question to the answers that the Cabinet members made.
Well, no. If you can submit that in writing, I'll make sure that it's answered, okay, and then we'll attach that to the minutes. Okay, Councillor McCormick, please.
All right, thank you, Chair. So I've got some questions on some of the bullet points in 321, and some of the information that it says a more detailed outline of these issues is set out in Appendix 3, but some of that information I think is missing. So having a look at the affordability issues and the cost of living crisis on page 37, it does appear that we have had a marked increase in market rent and social rent between April and November 2022, 6-month period. 3-bed and 4-bed, certainly in terms of the market rate, appears to have gone up. Well, the 4-bed hasn't gone up as much because I guess there's not that much in terms of rental properties available. There's waits of several years. So can you confirm to me the yearly waits for 2, 3 and 4-bed properties? And looking at the increase in market rent, I mean, this looks like 20% for 2 and 3-bed properties. I mean, is that true? What can we do about that? That's my first question. Also, mentioned in the bullet point, and I couldn't find any evidence of this, changes of housing standards, particularly with regards to damp and mould and Fire Safety Act 2021. So I presume that the changes were as a result of the Awab Ishak case. So that's relatively recent. What changes have actually happened to housing standards since then? And what legislation has been passed? What has been brought in front of this council to reflect that? Because I'm not aware of any legislation that's been passed. I'm just aware of the relevant Secretary of State exhorting housing associations to try harder with damp and mould in homes. But the problem is, the problems are twofold with that. You've got maintenance backlog issues, housing associations that don't have the money to make repairs, and the government's not backing them up. And we've also got a cost of living crisis that means that because fuel bills are going up, we've also got people unable to heat their homes. So I'd like to know what change in housing standards have come in with regards to damp and mould, and also Fire Safety Act 2021 for high-rise flats. What are the changes in standards, and what is the council seeking to do to address those issues? Because we've still got people in Crown Heights who are living in accommodation where the cladding has been deemed unsafe. That's a second inspection. The first one apparently passed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McCormick. Okay, Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Councillor McCormick, for your 3 questions. I will let Kate pick up on the figures about weights for you, and then moving on to your second question, which was in relation to housing standards. So I think there are 2 things. So the first is that there is, as you may recall, I made a statement previously on this, there's a commitment from the Borough Council to be clearer and firmer on our expectations of social housing providers with regard to damp and mould and the condition of properties. If you recall, I answered a question from a colleague around this table on that point. So the first is a political commitment, which I think we want to encapsulate in our strategy. And the second is that the government is clearly moving on social housing. There is a bill before Parliament at the moment, which is the Social Housing Regulation Bill. And we know that the Secretary of State is very keen to place greater obligations on social housing providers. This strategy document foresees some of those changes and ensures that our policy is set up to align with that emerging legislation. And then the third point, forgive me, what was the third point? Sorry, Councillor McCormick.
Fire Safety Act, and what can be done to help people in places like Crown Heights?
Thanks. Thank you, Councillor McCormick. I will ensure that Chris Williams in our Housing Standards team gets back to you with a written update on that.
Thank you very much. Okay, and the final speaker. I do beg your pardon, Kate.
I'll be very brief. In terms of the average waiting times for 2, 3 and 4 bedroom houses, a very detailed report with the annual allocations review was submitted to Scrutiny Committee just a couple of months ago. I will forward that paper to you, Councillor, or to all council members with the link on that. And we are just about to, at the end of this month, do our next annual review. So when the annual review is published, you'll be able to see, we'll be able to see what the comparisons are. But generally, waits for 2 and 3 bedroom properties in particular tend to be lower than for other areas within Hampshire and had been falling. But I'll allow you the pleasure of reading all of that report and its appendices, and you can come back to me offline if you had any sort of query about that. But it did go through a detailed scrutiny very recently.
Thank you very much. Okay, very quickly, Councillor Konesko, please.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor James, I've got you after Councillor Konesko. Okay, but it is because unfortunately we will be out of time. Okay, by the time that we've gone through. Okay.
We'll be coming to a meeting where we've got a robust paper, and I have spent a lot of time reading it, and I'm not going to even be given a chance to ask questions on it. Even to be able to ask just one question, but I've had about 3 or 4 in relation to this section. It really is very little point in being part of this committee if this is how this is going to function.
Okay,
I actually feel that we should have a vote of no confidence in you tonight if this is the way that we're going to actually carry on.
I'll second that.
This is crazy. This is absolutely crazy.
I understand where you're coming from, but
I'd like to move a vote of no confidence in you if this is how we're going to carry on tonight.
Yeah, I shall second that motion. Yeah, I've got to second it. I'm going to second that motion. I have no confidence in you as a chairman.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we've had a motion, we've had it seconded. Okay, there's a no confidence motion in myself, so I would like to put it to the vote. So who's going to vote for the motion?
Can you just be a bit more flexible in the meeting? I mean, I don't want to vote against you, but if you show a bit more flexibility.
I already have been. Okay, we're already 15 minutes. Okay, into this particular section. Okay, the issue I've got is that it's my role as chair to actually make sure that the committee gets through the work. Okay, on a timely basis. I've already set an hour. Okay, to go through this paper, and if we do that with an hour, with all the other stuff that we've got to get through, the other business items, we can get through it. Okay, by following the plan by 9:30. Okay, so just hold on, please, Councillor James. Okay, so therefore, okay, it's my duty as chair to make sure that the committee goes through, okay, and gets the business done in a timely fashion. Okay, I've outlined the plan. Okay, in this particular section, like the last section, we had 10 minutes, but unfortunately, with Councillor Cubitt, okay, she was taking up 40% of the allocated time. So I've already been denying questions from this side here as soon as we went over 10 minutes. Okay, so I'm being fair. Okay, now there's a motion on the table. Okay, for a vote of no confidence. Okay, who is in favour of the motion, please? Okay, that's 4 people. Okay, and who is against the motion, please? Do we have any abstentions? Okay, that motion is carried. If you just like to hold on, I'll confer with Rebecca, and we'll see where we go from there. I've been advised that I'll be handing over the meeting to the Vice Chair, and I'll be leaving the room. Thank you.
Right, okay. That obviously wasn't expected. We will continue on with the meeting. I'm happy. I get the sense from the committee that we want to be a bit more flexible in terms of timing, so I'm very happy to do that. I would remind the committee, though, that we do want to finish at a reasonable time, so if you can keep your questions to a minimum, that would be hugely appreciated. I think I'm actually next on the list, so I will ask my question briefly. And it's to do with the detail of updated priorities table on page 20. And there's a section there about addressing the climate emergency, which is very welcome. And I know it's one of the reasons that the portfolio holder has decided to update this document. However, I think the commentary about what we're going to do in terms of addressing the climate emergency is quite woolly. And when you look at the more detailed target table on page 51 in Appendix 5, it doesn't provide much more detail either. It still talks about proactively supporting and working with housing associations to tackle the climate emergency. So I was wondering if the portfolio holder could explain why we can't be more robust in terms of setting our targets there.
Thank you, Councillor, and I think it's a great shame that we've lost Councillors Frost from this meeting, who I think was chairing it in a professional way, and I think it's unfortunate that partisan politics has played a role in the scrutiny of the document, which is for the less affluent and less fortunate in our community. I think that is a great shame indeed. Now, in answer to the question put before us, on climate change, I think it's worth noting that this is a high-level document. This is a document that sets out direction. This is a document that sets out our strategic priorities. I'm very open to further suggestions from members of the committee about how this area can be tightened, how we can improve this section. I think that's very much the purpose of policy making and this committee process. If members wanted to write to either myself or to Kate with suggestions about how that could be tightened, we'd be very open to receiving that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor James?
Thank you. Echoing your point there about the climate change emergency, addressing it, I was really disappointed in the 3 lines that are in there. If this is a rewrite because of that being a priority, we need to be much better than that, and there needs to be much more within that report. So I really want to see a lot more in there. Green housing standards, delivery model designs, solar panels, electric charging points, and loads more. But we need to be much more about what we want in there, and really push from a housing perspective. Same as with regeneration. I think it's better than it was, and I think it's much better than it was in relation to where this administration was taking it, but I'd like to see more. We're going to have a new regeneration manager coming in, director, and I would just want more than this, and I think we can be even more ambitious, and regeneration can be much wider than just the fabric of the housing that we're doing. And so I think we should put a lot more substance to this part of your strategy. In relation to the housing choice and standards, picked up by Andy, in relation to housing standards. I want to see more around balconies and windows. We've got windows on top floor flats in most of my ward that have no catches, so open, and they're all being housed with young children and they can fall out. The doors don't lock, and so they can't shut the doors, so they're unable with their children. So it's a significant issue around housing standards. In relation to this section, I also want to pick up on the point about choice. If I just remind you of what was in the report, at the annual monitoring report, we built 82 two-bedroom flats and 50 houses affordable. So 62% of all the flats that were built were, or 62% of them were flats. Therefore, there isn't a choice. I want to pick up on prams and no lifts, where we store prams, and lots more, but we're not going to have a lot of time. So I'll leave it there, Chair.
Thank you. Portfolio holder, do you want to respond to any of those points?
Yes, thank you. Vice Chair? Chair? I'm not quite sure. I think it's worth remembering that we do have a separate climate change strategy, and that this is a high-level document that seeks to integrate our climate change aspirations into our housing service. But we do have that separate corporate strategy. But as I said to the chair or the vice chair, we are very open to suggestions in writing that could come in afterwards to tighten this policy section. In terms of regeneration, I think it's worth noting that yes, we have just brought in a new regeneration service as part of our council plan. So we have a new regeneration manager, new regeneration director coming in. I think it was relatively clear that regeneration was falling between two stools in various different parts of the council. We now have a direct service whose responsibility is to deliver these aspirations. I think that is a good thing that we have achieved. And on that point, it's worth noting that our vision for regeneration is that it's not simply residential. It is also about delivering community gain and all of those sort of facilities and amenities that make communities worth living in. So I would agree in that sense. And then on windows and balconies, obviously Kate is here and will be conscious of that from the operational delivery side. But I think it's worth noting that this is a strategy document that sets out key policy anchors and strategic priorities. And no document of this kind would carry that kind of very detailed information. But I'm sure that officers are taking note of what you've said.
Thank you. Councillor Tomlin and then Councillor Cubitt.
Thanks, Chair. It was just really a point of information. I sit on the climate change map, and last year we had our social housing partners, it was certainly Sovereign and Vivid, presented their plans for tackling the climate change. The disappointing thing was they're targeting 2040, we want 2030, but I think it's a good starting point that the information is actually out there and has already been presented. Maybe you could think about incorporating that, and we could take that as a starter. So thank you.
Anything to respond?
Only to say that obviously we are supportive of our social housing partners being really public and transparent with their climate change policies, and we'd encourage them to be aspirational, but obviously there's a degree to which social housing authorities are third parties and are going to have their own strategy, and it's the role of board members in this council to encourage them to go further, but it's probably not the place, this document is probably not the place for that.
Thank you. Councillor Cubitt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just in response to the Cabinet member, this is not a partisan decision. It was merely that the Scrutiny and Review Committee was certainly not working in a way that we've been used to it working for the last 15 years. I wanted actually to thank you, Cabinet member, for agreeing to add the word eradicate back into the document, and that it was an accent it had slipped out, so thank you very much. I was also going to thank you for agreeing to define Basingstoke West, which is not a terminology that I know, and to include buckskin specifically in Southam, so I thank you for that. What I wanted to ask and pick up on was in relation to this paper, which I also agree with you is about our most vulnerable in our borough, and therefore is really a document that's extremely important that we get the time and ability to discuss and scrutinise what's being done on our behalf, and as I said earlier, to also to commend the department that runs it as well as they do. What I wanted to know is, in 2020-21, we said that May Place House, this is in a document that's publicly available, it's in the Housing and Homeless Strategy Monitoring Report, that it is no longer fit for purpose in terms of its design, its location and its facilities. That was stated in the metric evaluation. So what I'd quite like to know is who politically has decided that now the location is in fact acceptable, and because I know the site very well, and I have to say that on many levels I would agree with what we originally said in 2020, which is that in terms of design, location and facilities, not fit for purpose. And secondly, even by 2020 we knew about the Culver Road refusal, and the housing team was undertaking to consider more suitable accommodation, and they were looking for alternatives. So who decided to stop looking for alternative accommodation, and who decided therefore to row back from what was originally stated by our borough, that May Place was no longer fit for purpose in terms of its design, location and facilities? That's to Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Councillor Cubitt. We may have to agree to disagree on the matter of the chair, as we do on almost everything, it seems. On May Place House, I think it's worth noting, you know, I agree that May Place House is not the optimal situation for the services it provides. However, we have to be pragmatic. What we need to do is ensure that we have a service for single person homelessness and that emergency accommodation. While the Borough Council does not currently have an alternative site, and given that the last alternative site that was put forward to development control was refused, I believe that the sensible thing to do would be to work on a programme to improve its design and its facilities. And we've spoken to Two Saints, we've spoken to the building owners, and we have got a plan in place to invest in that. So I think it is a sensible thing to do to improve the facilities in the location where they are at present. But no one has, to your point, Councillor Cubitt, made a decision not to look for alternative sites. You know, we are actively looking at alternatives, and if she is aware of an alternative, then we are very open to hearing that. But I think given where we are, we have to improve what we have for the benefit of the users of that service.
Cool. Thank you very much. Okay, so we've got two more questions for this section, Councillor Watson and Councillor McIntyre.
Thank you. Mine was more some information, again from our meeting on Monday with Sovereign. Some alarming statistics came out of that meeting. Since April last year, they've had over 900 cases of damp and mould in properties. Obviously, some of them could have been going to the same properties, but that's a really scary figure. And actually, at the moment, they've got over 190 sensors out in properties, monitoring whether the heat is actually getting to the 18 degrees, and people out there are not actually heating their houses, which is because they can't afford to, and it's causing mould and damp. So going back to our regeneration, it gives this a real priority that a lot of our housing stock isn't fit for purpose, and it should be a real emphasis on this council. That's more of a statement, really. Thank you.
Do you want to respond, portfolio holder?
Thank you, Councillor Watts. I think, you know, it's really important to me and to the administration, and you know, to everyone, I think, in this council, that residents are safe in their homes, and I think that's something that I've said before on record. record. And, you know, we have stepped up our work on the housing standards side on enforcement of damp and mould. It's very much a priority, and you'll see from government centrally that they are stepping up their efforts on that as well. I think it's really important that where, and this is a role for ward members, I think, where ward members are aware of particular specific cases in homes, we really want that to be reported to our housing standards team. You know, we really want people to work with, we want ward members to work with our environmental health team, our housing standards team, because if problems are arising in people's homes, we want to be able to help sort that out. And on the second point about regeneration, I think absolutely the points raised about the lack of sort of heat retention in some long-standing stock is a problem that I think is recognised by social housing providers and by the borough, and it only increases the importance of working on this regeneration project.
Thank you, Councillor McIntyre.
Thank you, Chair. I want to repeat Councillor Cubitt's thanks to the hard-working officers. Certainly, I mean, I've 6 months, 7 months in now in my councillor duties, and certainly every interaction I've had with Kate and her team has been absolutely exemplary. Fantastic help dealing with casework. I just want to go back to the homelessness, rough sleepers part of the strategy, because as part of my reading into the documentation, what I didn't actually realise is that this authority has achieved some fantastic work, where I believe we had 26 rough sleepers in 2016, and I think reported figures from Real Change Basingstoke were 2 December last year. So I mean, commendations to the Social Inclusion Partnership. I mean, they have a real track record of hard work and innovation and expertise. However, we can't rest on our laurels, and I guess absolutely I thank the portfolio holder for making that statement that we are still aiming to achieve 0 rough sleepers by 2024. Is the figure of 2 still correct, and how is that achievable? Because again, I appreciate that there's a lot of complex issues at hand, really, with trying to get these individuals the help they need. Thank you.
Go for it, Kate.
Thank you. The figure today is 0. The figure the day after the count could be 0. It could be 3. You know, this is a very, very fluid situation. I think the issue around using numbers is a tricky one, and absolutely the strategic objective of eradicating rough sleeping doesn't mean that you get there once and then you pack up and go home, because the causes of rough sleeping continue. We know this, and the causes of rough sleeping have amplified over the last few years. So this is around how we state our firm commitment to ensure that nobody needs to sleep rough on the streets, understanding that on some occasions, for some periods of time, some people may. What's absolutely important and imperative with rough sleeping, measuring your rough sleeping strategy, is the confidence with which you know that you have a range of services and a range of providers and a range of options to get people off the street as quickly as possible. And it's been very, very difficult when we've been talking about numbers. You know, if it's 2, does that mean we failed? Well, no, it means that we just continue to do the work we do to keep those, you know, to maintain the impotence that we have done. I think it's clear that it's really important to get that right, because it's not just us that we're talking about, it's the entire social inclusion partnership that is absolutely passionately committed to making sure that this borough council has no rough sleepers on our streets. And it's a bit like saying, you know, we have exemplary health services, but that doesn't mean that somebody won't be sick from time to time. It's that type of thing. So what we do is look at the historical figures, 26 down to 0, and then sort of staying at that nebulous sort of level, but also having regard to the whole range of packages and services around. And we know that we get the commendation from the ministry. We know that we still, in spite of having very low numbers, we are still getting funding for really innovative services, because they know that our preventative but highly reactive service response works, and that's why we're still getting the support. So how we capture that while still keeping ourselves on our toes is really, really important. So yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, Kate. Right, let's move on to section 4. Any questions or comments on section 4? No, I will have one in that case. Section 4.3, the Corporate Council Plan Scorecard Indicators. I'd be interested to know the portfolio holders' views in tightening some of these up. So, for example, the second one, no homeless family with children to occupy B&B for longer than 6 weeks. And could we strengthen that to say, and if they are, if for any homeless family occupying a B&B, that should be within the borough. We've already spoken about the zero, adding in the zero rough sleeping targets. So that's encouraging to see. So the third point was around the 300 additional affordable homes delivered per annum, which when you think we've got over 4,000 people on our housing register, doesn't really feel like it's going to touch the sides. So what can we do about strengthening those targets to make sure that they are helping those most in need in our borough?
Lovely. Thank you, Chair. So on the second bullet point, known homeless family with children, it's worth noting that's a statutory provision that's placed on us. You'll recall that it's an obligation on borough councils to have a housing and homelessness strategy, and this is one of those statutory features. On the second point he raises about affordable housing delivery, I think we have got a good record actually in this borough council on affordable housing delivery. We are delivering more affordable homes than any other district across Hampshire, which I think is very positive. But obviously we want to go further. You know, we want to go further on affordable housing delivery, and that is the target from our adopted local plan. If members wanted to change that target, that would have to be addressed within the local plan update process as and when that comes forward again.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. I'm going to allow myself a supplementary, which is to say that I appreciate that the 6 week target is statutory, but surely we can enhance that target. There's nothing to stop us from being more ambitious. And secondly, in terms of the 300 affordable housing target, whilst it's true that, as has been pointed out here, over the last 2 years we've beaten it, actually last year, according to the AMR, we fell short. So I think we've set this target, we've not reached it in the past 12 months. So we just need to be cognizant of that as well. But it'd be interesting to see why we can't make the B&B criterion stronger.
Thank you, Chair. Just on your affordable housing point, I think it's worth saying that affordable housing delivery is a percentage of homes built. And so, you know, the fewer homes that are built, the fewer homes that are permitted, the fewer homes that are brought forward, the fewer affordable homes are delivered. What we can do as a borough council, what we're really committed to, is making sure that we get our affordable percentage in. And if we miss a year on our affordable target, that is a disappointment, but it's not a reason to back away from our target and our aspiration. And of course, you'll note that we are, in this strategy, setting up a greater emphasis placed on social rent. And that's a recognition that we want affordable homes to be more affordable. I think Kate wants to pick up on the B&B point.
Just to say, maybe leave this as a suggestion to the portfolio holder, perhaps, that to leave the statutory target on 6 weeks intact, but to look at the wording of maintaining minimum levels of B&B usage, caveating with what I mentioned earlier about the need to make the service responsive, and minimising at all opportunities, or something like that, around that every effort is made. We can never say never, can we? But we can reflect that is the aim and the target of the service delivery, to keep families, if they have to go into bed and breakfast, to keep them within the area. And can I just add something to help in relation to the affordable housing delivery, which did crop up at scrutiny, so I think it is important to keep the consistency here. The AMR reported a shortfall of 11 units, the numbers of completions that we use for our housing strategy, because quarter 4 and quarter 1 of the next year tends to reflect different slippages, they're actually measuring different things. So it may be a pedantic point from the officer, but actually the affordable housing target, as reported to us in terms of numbers of completions by the RPs, didn't slip below that target last year.
Thank you, Kate. Councillor James.
It's been answered, thank you.
Right. Any other questions on section 4? Councillor Cubitt, Councillor McCormick.
Yes, I think the chair makes a very good point with regards to the scorecards, and I was wondering whether members we would like to put forward a motion from this committee suggesting that on top of the statutory undertakings, no homeless family with children or pregnant family member to occupy B&B for no longer than 6 weeks within the borough. So we could add within the borough. Would anyone like to second that as a motion?
That's okay. It's been suggested to me by officers that if we can, rather than putting this as a formal motion, if we can do a show of hands to indicate our support and the strength of our support for this particular idea.
Sorry. If I've got someone who's prepared to second it, I prefer to do more than a show of hands because it makes it more concrete. And Councillor McIntyre's right. Everything we do is recommendations because it's a cabinet-led, cabinet-run council.
Okay, so do we have a second of Councillor James? Okay. Councillor Cubitt, are you able to outline your motion again for the record?
Yes, this committee recommends that the cabinet member considers amending the corporate council plan scorecard indicator. Second bullet point: no homeless family with children or pregnant family member to occupy B&B for longer than 6 weeks, and undertakes within the borough. No, just within the borough at the end. Keep it simple.
Thank you, Councillor Cubitt. Yes, do you want to have any input into that, Kate?
Just a practical point that maybe a caveat where it's unless it's not safe to do so, because some cases will require replacement out of borough.
Yeah, no, absolutely accept that in case of domestic issues. Yeah.
Thank you all. Yeah, I think that's a valid amendment. Okay, so we've got a motion that's been seconded. Everyone in favour of the motion, raise your hand. I think that's unanimous, isn't it? Yes, we can put that forward as a recommendation, please, to the portfolio holder.
If I could just follow up on your other very good point, which I wasn't happy with the answer from the cabinet member. It was in relation to the 300 additional affordable homes. And the suggestion from the cabinet member was that it's beyond our areas of competence to affect and impact that number. And I just would like it on the record that if the cabinet was so minded and the council was so minded, we could actively encourage council houses to be built on council-owned land. So it is a conscious political decision to be dictated to by economic forces and affordable housing ratios, when we could make a decision and we could actually undertake and commit to build council houses and wouldn't have to be governed by forces.
Thank you, Councillor Cubitt. There is a full council motion that is in the process of being delivered on exactly that subject, but I'll let Councillor Carr very briefly, if he may, respond to that.
Yes, of course. I was just going to reflect that there's a separate and distinct process ongoing following that motion passed at full council in relation to the proposal for research into council house building as a potential option. I think members will have seen in their work programme near the end of their packets that this is actually in process. I believe a paper on research will be coming before you in July, and I'm sure that's a conversation that we can pick up at that time. So I won't detain the committee any longer on that point.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. And the final question in this section for Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at section 4.3, business unit service plan monitoring. What is the business unit and what service plan are we monitoring?
The housing and social inclusion business and parts of the regulatory services in relation to housing standards and our operational service plans.
Does that answer your question, Councillor McCormick?
I think so. I didn't realise we had a business in the council.
Okay, right. So that's section 4 completed. Section 5 is then the options analysis. So I propose we leave that to the end. But can we go through the appendices now? So any comments or questions on Appendix 1? Councillor James.
So, again, in relation to housing choice, I just think the comment in relation to the common, why do we do and want to do this? I just think I think that we need to be better than this. I think there's, in relation to what we're offering and what we're doing, we need to explore more options. Like I say, in relation to, and I go back to the flats that we're building, the lack of bungalows that we're doing. So in relation to the housing mix policy, I would like us to look at that as a council. Speaking to Vivid this week, they're saying they're constrained by that policy. And so I would like us to explore what we're building and what we're not building, and examine that in relation to the local plan. It says in relation to places and environments that people are living in places that they don't want to live. The council plan in section 1 of this report said that people had to be happy. I think the words were happy. A place where people can live happily. Well, there's lots of people in my ward that are living in places where they're not happy, so we're failing them. I just would like us to look again at this, and I just think we need to be much more ambitious. And in relation to the bit on enforcement, the bit on disabled adaptions, we talk about disability and people suffering long-term illness, but we don't talk about ageing. I think people who age should be able to stay in their own properties and have them adapted. I have, again, examples in my own ward where people had to move because it didn't suit them, their home, but really they were very unhappy now where they're living in a flat and it's not what they want to be living in. And so we need to look at adaptations in relation to ageing. We're going to have an ageing population coming forward, and therefore so much more I can say, but I'll leave it at that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor James. Councillor Carr, saw you scribbling down lots of those comments. Anything that you want to add?
Yes, just to make sure I captured everything, Chair. No, just to note that I think the important points that are raised with regard to provision of bungalows and whether people have the choice of properties to live in that they wish, and disabled adaptation, I think are matters for our local plan update discussion. And I know that that's a matter that Councillor James has engaged with in detail, and I'd encourage her to bring those issues back to that forum.
Thank you. Any other questions on appendix or comments on Appendix 1? No. In that case, we'll move on to Appendix 2. Appendix 3. Yes, Councillor James.
I just point out the 73% satisfaction amongst housing association tenants, and I don't know how many people where you got that. I'd quite like to know where that came from, that statistic, but it's worrying, I suppose, in a concern. I also would like to ask the question in relation to the tenure. It says other. What is the 1,489? What does that represent? And it talks here about the register going down, but in relation to the lettings policy that came to scrutiny, it was very clear that a significant number of people have been removed from the register. So, and this doesn't make reference to that. And so I think it's important that this committee is aware of why the register has gone down. And in relation to band 1, on the just over the page, I again, in the lettings policy, it referred to, I think it was 93%, I think it was, of under occupiers in band 1. Are they single people, as in older people? I'd just like to understand what the profile of that 93% are in that band 1? Thank you.
I suspect that's one for Kate.
Yeah, we can certainly give you a written answer on that in terms of the breakdown. And again, why were numbers removed from the housing register? A lot of that was to do with the way that we worked during COVID in terms of making sure that we weren't removing people from the housing register during that period of time. When we say removing people from the housing register, that speaks to the ongoing review of cases. So we picked up our rolling review to ensure that people who were on the register were still in need and still wanted to remain on the register. So that's why people may have been taken off, because their housing circumstances have changed, and we've maintained a rolling review since then. Numbers are creeping up again slightly, so that is what happens when you don't do a review. You then have a sort of more wholesale approach because you haven't done it for a long time. It will go down and then it will recover again.
Thank you, Kate. Any more questions? Councillor Cubitt.
Yes, just one very brief one to Kate. Do we have to help meet the needs of housing and homeless for Reading? And if so, in what is that an obligation on our part? Because it's languages I've come across in another borough nearby.
Absolutely not. That's Reading's responsibility.
Thank you both very much. Okay, Appendix 4 on page 45. Any questions or comments on that? So that's the consultation responses. No, in which case we'll move on to Appendix 5, page 51. Some of the KPIs, we've discussed some of these already in an earlier section, but if anyone has anything to add, now's your time. Councillor Cubitt.
For the record, so so there's been a commitment to reinsert the word eradicate by 2024. There's been an agreement by the cabinet member to add South Ham and Buckskin on the regeneration section, and greater definition of Basingstoke West. And there was a commitment tonight by the cabinet member that you were only regenerating Mayplace because there wasn't an alternative venue secured or identified, and so therefore I would quite like on the targets for the commitment to find a new, whatever it was before, to find a new fit for purpose emergency single homeless hostel. That needs to remain in the targets, please.
Thank you, Councillor Cubitt. Kate, do you have anything to add to that?
Only that the intention behind the proposed improvements to May Place will mean that it is fit for purpose and remains fit for purpose. Part of the reference previously to the location was the assumption that it couldn't be improved. That building on that site couldn't be improved. We have now found that it can be substantially. So that's why there's been that shift. I think it would be prudent to take a view once we've exhausted the May Place improvement routes on whether or not an additional facility thereafter is still required. But it's about continuously reviewing the frontline accommodation offer to people who are street homeless.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll leave that one there, and we'll move back to page 23. I'll very quickly go through the other sections. So section 6, legal, section 7, financial, 8, risk management, 9, equality, diversity, inclusion, and 11, climate change. Any comments or questions on those? No. Doesn't appear to be. In that case, we'll move on to the final bit, the options analysis. So we've got 3 options to consider tonight: whether we do nothing with the strategy, whether we start a new strategy from scratch, or whether we update the existing one. I'm getting a sense from the questions and comments that we've had over the past hour or so that option 3, so updating what we currently have in the light of the conversations that we've had, is probably going to be the preferred route. So without wishing to go to a vote, is everyone agreed to that? Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. Just one point. What we haven't discussed on this agenda item is the preamble, because there's actually a political statement at the beginning of the preamble, which I think is inappropriate, especially considering we've had a particular case with Clint Nelson that was, he was lucky to survive it. So I don't think a political thing about Conservatives, etc., is appropriate for a paper like this? Because by implication, it's saying that the other parties, this is a conservative thing that other parties don't think about. We've had plenty of cross-party suggestions tonight. So I'd move to strike the first sentence and half the second sentence, and as far as made great progress, and insert in front of made great progress, this council and its partners have made great progress in our core mission, because I don't think it's appropriate to make a political point on this.
Thank you, Councillor McCormick. Can I just check, because the section you're referring to is in the foreword on page 11. Is that form part of this report that we're endorsing, or is that an introduction to it and therefore separate?
It's the cabinet member's forward, so it's the forward to the paper from the cabinet member as opposed to the bulk of the paper. So depending on how the committee structure it, you could take that recommendation and pass that forward in terms of not agreeing to that section, and then still, if you wish to, as the committee, endorse the rest of the report. It's entirely up to you how you want to structure that as the committee.
Okay, so Councillor Watts, as well, you had your hand up earlier. Did you want to add anything as well before we take this to any further?
I didn't have my hand up, but I'll just say overall, I've been wearing my partisan hat. I mean, this council have done very well on homelessness over the last 3 or 4 years. We got a lot of money from the government during COVID, which really sort of eradicated homelessness within the rough sleeping, I should say, within this borough, and it's up to us to sustain that in coming years. I mean, the statistics that came out this week, there's been a 74% increase since 2010. So when you go to a sizable towns like Winchester, it's homeless people on the streets are much more prevalent, aren't they? I mean, I was in Plymouth 2 weeks ago and it was like horrendous. So give credit where it's due. I'd like to thank the officers and the cabinet member for their efforts. Thank you.
Okay, in that case, I'm going to propose that we go for option 3 with the forward unamended as it currently stands. If we can do a show of hands on that, and if that fails, then we'll look at potentially changing that. So all in favour of option 3, so incorporating light touch review of priorities within the strategy in the light of the discussions that we've had this evening. Who, show of hands please, in favour? Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Anyone against? Did you vote the other way as well, Councillor McCormick, or did I misread?
No, I'm unsure as to what are we saying we're quite happy with the forward, because I'm not.
Yes, so what we're voting on is keeping the forward as it remains. So, okay, all right, let's do that vote again then. So everyone for option 3, but keeping the forward as is. Hands up, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3. Any abstentions? No, in that case, that's carried. So we're option 3, leaving the forward as is, but I think we have noted on the record Councillor McCormick's concerns. Okay, so that's agenda item number 5 dealt with. We move on to agenda item 6. We do have a speaker for this, but I'm going to ask Councillor Ganesh, the cabinet member, to introduce this first, and we'll come on and give the speaker an opportunity. So, Councillor Ganesh, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, committee. As some of you may remember, the last year around this time, Councillor Jenny Wokes and I proposed and seconded a motion at the full council to recognise the difficulties experienced by some of the local communities, like the residents moving into the new housing developments where amenities and open spaces are not well maintained by the developers until the time of the adoption by the borough council or the management agent or the highways authority. So that was unanimously agreed by the members. Following on that, Council's green space management, maintenance and adoption process has been updated significantly through the review of adoption standards and strengthened the wording around the legal text or agreements. So these changes are considered appropriate to provide a mechanism that will ensure that spaces are well maintained and the adoption can be put forward in the standard that's expected by the Borough Council or the management agent or the highways authority. To show the improvements of the approach, this report provides councillors with some sort of a background with the previous legal agreements as well as what is currently being put forward. And in order to consider the position in terms of the older housing developments, a full review of each site is required, which has been done by the team. And we've got around sort of 100 sites that are in sort of various stages of this transfer process. And thanks for the task and finish group that had done a lot of work around this the last year. I understand some of the posts within the team who are working on this particular piece of work are vacant at the moment, and the recruitment process are in progress in order to fill those positions. And the consideration outlined in this report are relevant to our council's the council plan priorities, including protecting and enhancing the environment and strengthening communities. I appreciate there are still work need to be done, and we're still working around some of the old existing the properties, and your contribution and recommendation or the views that expressed here today can contribute towards the delivery of the work or the way forward for this the piece of work. And I would like to get Greg to introduce the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So, as is set out within the agenda papers, the growing concern with regard to green space standards prior to adoption by the Council or management company is noted, and it's acknowledged that some historic obligations and subsequent enforcement have been inadequate or protracted. Officers in the Natural Environment Team, Legal Team and Planning Teams have undertaken or are in the process of working to correct identified site-specific issues, including through additional temporary resources in the Natural Environment Team, but also ensure that future issues do not occur by ensuring that legal agreements are appropriate for future developments in the current planning environment. Following negotiation, legal agreements are the mechanism for enforcing open space delivery and standards. As can be seen within the appendices to the agenda, clauses have developed significantly since the early 2000s and have developed again more recently in Appendix 3 to reflect the current physical and policy environment. The main recent changes are set out at section 4.2 in your report and include requiring an upfront open space plan, including enforceable backstop triggers for delivery, and most effectively, in my view, a formal notice procedure which requires the completion of identified remedial works, season dependent, by a developer following the council issuing a notice, which is set out at point 1.17 at Appendix 3 on page 68. As you can see from point 6 at Appendix 2 on page 62, there was no such similar notice procedure previously, with instead requirements of open space to be maintained to reasonable satisfaction and to the generality of the council's standard, and from the absence of any such clauses in more historic agreements in Appendix 1. A conclusion to the agenda papers at paragraph 11.3 also notes that in addition to the above explained changes, there is to be a register maintained and monitored of implicated sites, and also to allow monitoring of new obligations to ensure that these are working and appropriate. This is in addition to the Officer Green Infrastructure Working Group that exists. I think it's also worth noting as a point of interest that in respect of sustainable urban drainage systems, which are often within such spaces, in January this year the government published a review of SUDs, which included making County Council local lead flood authorities responsible as SUDs approval bodies to regulate SUDs and check compliance with such schemes, with government acknowledging that the current unregulated system is not appropriate, which is welcome. One final point, just by way of verbal update to the agenda report, is that at 2.1, bullet point 1, by way of clarification, the contribution taken when the council adopts space is equivalent to 25 years of maintenance, but the council will then continue to maintain the land in perpetuity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Greg. Before we move into questions from members, we need to introduce our visiting speaker. So, Councillor Vaux, if you can come to the table. You'll have 4 minutes, and I will let you know when there's 1 minute of your time remaining. And those 4 minutes begin as soon as I work out what the button on this is, and you start speaking.
Thanks very much, Chair. So, I'm addressing you, obviously, on this evening's agenda item entitled Maintaining Amenities and Green Spaces. As the papers set out, this follows unanimous adoption at the January 2022 council meeting. The motion is set out in your papers, which I proposed and Councillor Ganesh seconded at that meeting. For any committee members who were not present at the council meeting, the level of support for this motion reflected the long-standing and deep frustration ward councillors from all parties and wards feel about this issue. For many years, developers have been promising us great community spaces and assets as part of beautiful housing developments, and yet our residents have had to put up with broken lights, muddy paths and uneven pavements, and a myriad of substandard community facilities until they are adopted. The paper presented to EPH this evening suggests that going forward this is no longer a problem. It's just about clearing up the backlog from previous less prescriptive legal agreements. But let's not underestimate that backlog. The paper tells us delays are due to staff vacancies and that there are over 100 sites to deal with. I don't find this reassuring, so it's a very serious issue. The two examples I highlighted over a year ago at the January 2022 meeting still remain outstanding. Petty's Copse Path remains a muddy mess, it's been for years, and while last month excess vegetation was trimmed back behind Remembrance Gardens, the work took 18 months to be actioned and the land remains unadopted. And these are not the only examples. So our residents deserve better, and I urge the committee to request a greater focus on clearing up the backlog from these 100 sites. I accept that it is challenging to attract and retain experienced staff in this area of expertise, but that is not in itself sufficient reason to shrug and accept it. If something is a genuine priority, it can and should be resolved. Looking forward, I welcome the action set out in section 4.2 in Appendix 3, provides a degree of assurance, and I thank Greg for explaining that and the way the paper's been set out. But I would like a little more assurance, please, Greg, because when I read it, I did not see the remedy in these papers for the continued maintenance of green spaces and community assets between their first being created and the time they're prepared for adoption. In your preamble there, you implied that you could bring in a remedy if things weren't up to standard. But when I read it, I didn't read it that way. I saw the remedy being when it was first offered for adoption, you had a period when you could ask for something to be remedied before there was a final adoption. So, yeah, so I think that would, because that's the core of the issue that's being raised here, because the motion said to ensure infrastructure, amenities and open green spaces within housing developments are maintained by developers to the quality specification and standards set out in planning contracts from the time the infrastructure, amenities and green spaces are created to the point of adoption. So I'm seeking that really is what's in these papers. That's the fundamental issue for many of our problems that our residents are experiencing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any questions of the visiting speaker whilst she's here? Councillor Cubitt.
Councillor Vaux, thank you very much. I think the points that you've made are extremely well made. I think your motion was excellent. I think it's great that we've got a paper here. But obviously you have collective responsibility as a cabinet member. So whilst it's very useful to hear your concerns, and we all have very severe concerns because we all have similar problems, and we have very similar problems with regards to developers that flat pack, so they bankrupt themselves, put the assets into another account, and then we can't chase the original builder. So I just wondered what you could tell us is are you going to advocate and ensure happens in your capacity as a cabinet member with collective responsibility?
Thank you, Councillor Cubitt. Whilst we have a cabinet with collective responsibility, nevertheless there are other issues required to make this work. And that's about priorities for recruitment, it's priorities around staff. So whilst we can set policy, we can't actually make things happen in that sense. So let's be honest about this. This is about the labour market. This is about how we as a council attract the right staff. So yes, I am doing everything I can to make this council the most attractive one to work for, and I think we've made great strides in that. I think the LGA report shows that we've made great strides, but we still need to attract people that will take on this kind of work. So it's important that we focus on that and not get distracted. I think there's so many priorities, aren't there, in every council. Homes and homelessness was a priority we were talking about just now. They're all really important things. But what I want to ensure is that we don't take our eye off the ball on this one just because this motion has come and it's come to EPH and it disappears. I want to keep the pressure up.
Thank you both for that. Okay, right, I think questions now and comments to the portfolio holder. What we'll do, bear with me 1 second, we'll take the paper, I think, in its entirety because it doesn't really make that much sense to break it up into sections, given it's quite short and everything works together. So, Councillor Cubitt and then Councillor James, please. Okay. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, so just to repeat, thank you very much for bringing this paper to us. Thank you very much for undertaking to go forward with the commitment that we at Council gave to both you, the seconder and the mover of this excellent motion. We all know we've all got problems. I had a horrific problem in Lichpit with Broadhurst and Saxon Way. I was very badly advised by the council. I was explicitly told that we could that we owned it and that it couldn't be sold, and anywhere long as short of it is, in the end, my poor residents ended up having to spend about £35,000 because of the bad advice that I was given. So I'm very glad to hear that historic issues are being undertaken, and I'm very glad to hear that the cabinet member is going to make sure that these issues are resolved. What I would like to know is what are we going to do in relation to developers who flat pack and then we have no one to go after if they don't adhere to the undertakings that they've made in their planning application for the provision of open space and the looking and maintenance thereafter. Because when you look at the legal documentation, I mean, legal documentations are great, but if the company doesn't exist anymore, what redress do we have?
Councillor Ganesh.
Thank you, Councillor Cubitt. And I'm not a technical expert to advise you on that the situation with Lichpit, but in terms of the current developer not complying with the obligations and leaving the site is something that probably looked in through this the current legal agreement by strengthening some of the wording, which is to make the contribution in advance. That you probably may have picked it up on the legal wordings, and this is not just that the highlighting the issue as sort of an overall will bring some sort of a recognition among the developers that the authority is keen on getting or making sure that all the amenities and the public spaces are maintained, not just as when it's handed over or adopted, but during the build and while it's being built all the way to the adoption. So what I can assure is this is an ongoing progress, and some of the comments made by Councillor Oakes and whatever the recommendations that the members may come up with can contribute towards this. And I'm sure if Greg's got anything to add on to that.
Yes, I can certainly add to that. So firstly, just in terms of the question around the ownership, and obviously this paper is looking at the maintenance of open space rather than the ownership question, which is probably a different paper. And in particular, you mentioned what happens if companies go into receivership. That obviously tends to happen with some of the smaller companies, the arrangement that you talked about. And yes, I'm aware that it does happen, and that the English land ownership and business setup does allow for that. So it may be something that is probably beyond the scope of the planning department as such, but maybe it's something that could be raised with local MPs. In terms of whether there is anything that could be done to the way that the companies are able to act. It doesn't, in my experience, it tends to happen with the smaller companies rather than the larger companies, but the smaller companies tend to do the smaller schemes, which tend to be at the heart of some of the communities. What could be looked at is obviously the terms of the agreement. There are surety bonds that are included in legal agreements in certain instances. They aren't necessarily the whole value of the whole legal agreement, because that would be several million, but it would allow for that to be drawn against, and monies taken to undertake remedial works in the event that a company ceased to exist. As I said, that doesn't tend to happen or be necessary for larger companies that are multi-million-pound companies and don't set up a similar type of parent company and child company relationship. But that's something that certainly could be looked at by the Office of Green Infrastructure group that already exists.
It's a quick one. A couple of my residents in a parish, thank you for that answer, and I would like it to be looked into, because you're probably aware of some specific examples that have happened very recently in my ward, which have caused great angst, and in the next door borough, by one specific company that's moved all their assets into another company, and then they've bankrupted their company, and now nobody has got any redress to them. And it's having very severe ramifications to the community. The sewage hasn't been sorted out, nothing's been sorted out. So that's like, but also the open space hasn't been met. So it's a combination, hence the relevance of the question. A couple of my parish councillors in one of my parishes is currently doing an audit of open spaces, because they're so concerned, because they got very badly burnt with Saxon Way and Broadhurst Grove. Who can they speak to in your department to liaise to check that the open spaces they've identified that are being maintained by the council, that they're not sure about the ownership, is being considered in the historic legacy undertakings that you've got in your final section, conclusion 12?
If I could just pick that up. Obviously, residents are able to raise complaints through the compliance enforcement team, and they'll be looked at by the Green Spaces team as well, the Public Open Space Officer, when in post, as to whether there's compliance with any legal agreement. Normally, obviously, if there are any complaints, then officers are aware of them, or if there is a scheme that's one of the 100, then officers are aware of them and are working through them in any event. But yeah, residents are obviously encouraged to speak with compliance enforcement team or the natural environment team if there's a particular site that they've got queries on, and we can advise where that is. But that's specifically with regard to the maintenance of land. In terms of land ownership, that's not a material planning consideration and isn't obviously the subject of this paper. I understand that's a very different issue that's been a significant issue for your residents, and you were advised on that, I think, at that time with that, but from legal officers. Obviously, this paper is considering the maintenance of open space rather than ownership and Sorry. Can we perhaps leave this one for you to talk to Greg offline tomorrow morning and resolve this one if it's in relation to a specific issue rather than the broader paper? Thank you very much. Councillor James.
Thank you. I suppose picking up on the point of recruitment, what I'm concerned about is obviously the shortage of staff in this whole area of work and the impact if we have this 100 cases, the amount of time. I'm not saying we should, but should we look at getting a consultant in to do this piece of work, or not a consultant, another member of staff to come in and do this piece of work to do the backlog? Surely that would be advisable at this stage. I also like to pick up on the point that I'm always chasing. So at the moment, I'm chasing where we are in relation to a big site in our ward that is due to be adopted, and then and I have been chasing. Obviously, there isn't the staff there. They've come back to me this week, but they're struggling. But what I think should happen as a councillor is we should be told before a site is adopted, and at the moment that doesn't happen. And I really feel that before that happens, we need to be sure that we as councillors are happy with it. So before it gets signed off, we have an opportunity to say, no, this tree, we're not happy with this, or this bush, or, so I would really urge that as councillors we can do that. I have got contact with the councillors, the officers at the moment, but like I say, I know that they're being pulled from somewhere else to do this piece of work, and they're under enormous pressure. It's just, what are we going to do? And I know there's a significant issue in relation to their department as well, in relation to this whole area of work. So there is a shortfall. So in relation to the cabinet member who's proposing this, maybe the answer is that we actually put some money in to employ some interim staff to come in and do this piece of work. And I'd urge her to actually suggest that to the leader of the council, that this happens, and to the chief executive, but also that we, going forward, how do members actually, as part of this process, as with the 106 in the beginning, what is our process in sign-off?
Thank you. Councillor Ganesh.
Thank you, Councillor James. Picking up on the vacant posts on open spaces officer, green spaces officer, and infrastructure monitoring officer, those three are vacant at the moment. We've got the resources are available, funding's available, and it's been advertised, and the recruitment process had been going on at the moment. But your suggestion around using a consultant on a particular piece of work, that's something probably the heads of service, and we can have the conversation if that is something can be looked into on a sort of a temporary basis to bring up to the speed in terms of bringing those 100 cases back into the speed. But the resources is not an issue. We've got those FTEs in place, and the recruitment process has been going on, and it's just a matter of recruiting those officers in place and getting back to resolve these 100 cases. And going back to the adoption point where councillors can have a say, it's a very good suggestion that we have been practicing in our ward. Councillor Bound, Councillor McIntyre and myself, we usually work with officers, work with the developers, as and when these open spaces or any amenities are handed in. We usually have an inspection around the same time as the officers meet with the developers. So it's a matter of us putting ourselves forward and ask the officers and ask the developers and where we are with those and engaging at that point. But that's something definitely, it is very good practice that can be really useful at the point of adoption. Craig, if you've got anything to add on to.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, I mean, you're right, your recruitment process is ongoing for those 3 members of staff. One of those posts is actually an additional temporary post in particular to pick up on this issue, to work through those cases. But if I could just obviously add that those 100 cases aren't all backlog cases. Some of them are cases that would have been on hand anyway. And the final point, just in respect of being notified when an area of open space is going to be adopted, I think that's a really sensible point. Thank you.
How do we formalise that then? And it's a good point, but how do we make that a part of the structure that we do? Because I chase it and I know that I'm on it, but if I miss one, or it should be that it's part of the business of this council, that before something is signed off, that the councillors are asked, are they happy? Because maybe not all councillors are on top of their brief, and so it may get missed.
Yes, you make a recommendation to the portfolio holder, who speaks with the relevant department head, but also I will be passing it through to the Green Infrastructure Working Group.
Could we do that then tonight, that we make that recommendation? Is the committee happy to make that recommendation tonight?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Councillor Ganesh, if that can be noted, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor James. I think that's a very good suggestion, because it works very well within our ward. I know it's not a very straightforward as we would like to see it, because keeping developers chasing and trying to find out when these amenities or open spaces are ready, it's not an easy job that we have been back and forth for months to find or get to that point. But if you would like the officers to formalise the process in some way, for example, when the officers do their examination process to match with the master plan, that can be something I can definitely put forward to the heads of service and see if that can be formalised as part of the process of adoption. Thank you.
Good, thank you, Councillor Ganesh. Question from me. From reading this paper, there's a presumption that the new clause agreement, the one in Appendix 3, has fixed a lot of the issues. And I'd just be interested to know, has it fixed all of the issues? Are there still some issues based on the new contract? If so, do these tend to be exceptional cases, or are they quite frequent? So just trying to get a sense of how effective this Appendix 3 contract is, and whether it requires further strengthening in the future, or if it's doing its job effectively. Thank you, Chair. That will obviously remain under review, and in the conclusion, although it's under heading 12, it's actually 11.3, I think it is, 11.2, 11.3, that obviously it will remain under review to ensure that it is a successful clause. My view on it is that it is much improved, certainly from the early 2000s, but then much improved from 2012 as well. But yeah, 11.3 will be Section 106 agreements should be monitored by officers with the natural environment team, and then reported to the head of environment and community services to consider if the new procedures and obligations are working appropriately. Sorry, just follow up. Do you have any stats to sort of demonstrate that it's working effectively? Not yet, because they're working through the process. Obviously, they relate to current planning applications, and those current planning applications, what you have in the appendices is examples from particular developments lifted, and they will be working their way through the process. Agreements for larger sites which these are taken from, tend to be at outline stage, and then you have to work through the outline stage, reserve matters, conditions. So it'll be some time until they are then constructed, and the construction will be over potentially a number of years, with the open space coming along at a particular point. So it's very much a monitoring on a site-by-site basis, with the assistance of members and residents, in addition to those posts that we're recruiting to. Thank you, Greg. Councillor Ganesh.
Thank you, Chair. As I mentioned in my intro, this is a work in progress, and we're more than welcome to improve or take your input towards it to improve. And as mentioned in this committee so many times, there's no harm in being ambitious. So if there's a way to improve, like you've recommended us to put a formal process as part of the adoption for councillors to be part of it, something similar to that, if that can be helpful to improve the entire adoption process, or improve the way these amenities are maintained while being built to adoption. We're happy to take those recommendations, and this is not just the end of the process, this is just an ongoing process, and the members are welcome to speak to me or any officers regarding that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ganesh. I've got Councillor Tomlin, then Councillor McIntyre, then Councillor McCormick, and then we'll take a break.
Thank you, Chair. I'm on page 55 of your report there. The in the middle of the page, it's really sort of beg some indulgence, really. We've got the comment there that's for the developer to decide whether or not a site is offered for adoption or maintained by a management company. I haven't had the privilege of reading the Task and Finish Group's report. I wasn't on the committee then, but I will go and have a good look. However, if you could tell me, is it MPPF or is it law or something that gives the developer this choice? I'll have a supplementary then on that. That's the first question.
Yeah, it's a legal position that the council can't distinguish between the two.
And the supplementary then, so we can't distinguish, and clearly what is happening, we're all talking about case examples, so I won't go into it in detail, but a management company is failing to deliver with the developer what it's supposed to do. But of course it's all 106 agreements we're talking about here, so is there anything we can do as a council to intervene in this particular instance?
I'm not sure whether the particular instance is the one we had an exchange on today, or whether it's another one that we've met on site in the past. But both of those situations were situations where you're in the Appendix 2 rather than the new Appendix 3 scenario of the paper before you. If it's the one today, then we haven't got to the management company position, and the situation rests very much with the developer, which the new clause in Appendix 3, 1.17, would allow us to buy. It would allow us to serve a notice if that existed. But it is with the Natural Environment Team leader, as you know. They are aware of that particular site and are looking to pick it up with the available resources they do have. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. I think Councillor Ganesh, you wanted to add something to that.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to quickly just from the experience within my ward around when management companies fail, at the moment it comes down to residents to deal with it, which is very unfortunate situation where I have dealt with number of occasions dealing with residents' complaints where a management company fails. But the only catch there is when it's managed by the management company, it will they will be charging some sort of fee to the freeholds. So at that point, it's the residents will have the rights to have a say on whether you complete the job, I'll pay the fee, or I will not be paying the fee. That's how it's been dealt. So it's kind of a sort of a pay and service situation at that point. But it's very unfortunate. We have been dealing with in our ward a number of times in the past.
Thank you. Portfolio holder, Councillor McIntyre.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Laura James advocating for the council to spend money on consultants. Don't let Councillor Gavin James hear that. He will disown you for that statement.
And I actually said in interim staff because I made a mistake and used the wrong word, and I did clarify that. So if you know, that's what I said, and I do apologise for using the wrong word.
It was a comment made in jest, Councillor James. I know. Okay, so my question really is where I'm backing up what Councillor Vo said about where we can be more prescriptive in taking action against this list of 100 outstanding sites, and also touching on the proposed NPPF reforms. I believe one of the proposed questions was to take into account developers' previous responsible behaviours. Would this be a situation where, hypothetically, we're thinking these are the types of irresponsible behaviours that we could potentially use as a stick to provide some leverage against these companies? Because I mean, to back up what Councillor Ganesh has said, I mean, it's I think 50% of my working evening as a ward councillor is dealing with trying to get these larger developers to commit to their promises, and they're letting down our residents. So absolutely, I'm very keen in being able to hold their feet to the fire. Thank you.
Greg, is that one for you?
I suppose emerging policies is and the intent of those is useful to know, but obviously at the moment we can only work within the system that we've got. But in the future, if there's something that comes and inserts that we hold developers and kind of keep a score of who's performed well and not, and obviously that's something we'll be able to do in the future.
Thank you. And then the final question in this section to Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. So I thought Councillor Tomlin was going to ask a particular question, but I'm on the same section there about developers and management companies and things like that. So if a developer decides that they want to sell their land on to a management company, and the management company in many cases is charging ground rent to residents, and the residents don't have a lot to show for it after a few years, how often are we using the powers that we've got under Section 215 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990, where it requires landowners to take steps to clean land up when its condition adversely affects the amenity of the area. And there are numerous examples I can think of, but in a particular case in point where we've got things like walls, retaining walls that are at the point of collapse, we've got them all over the town, and there doesn't seem to be anything that's been done about it for years.
Greg.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not sure if we're still on the same subject of maintaining open spaces, or if that's kind of moved on to maintaining kind of property assets, or if it's focused at private land. I mean, or whether it's unsafe structures and moving into kind of building control area. If it's regarding the 100 kind of on-hand cases, then obviously working with developers to try and ensure that that space is appropriately maintained, and working through any legal agreement, well, first of all negotiating and working with them, second of all working through any legal agreements is the course of action. And if it needed to move to Section 215 untidy land notice, then obviously that is something that could be used. I'm not aware that it has been used by the Natural Environment team yet, specifically for those open spaces on site, but we do use 215 notices elsewhere where there are untidy sites within the borough, which tend to be either businesses that are more run down and have closed, or private residential properties. Thank you, Chair.
Does that answer your question, Councillor McCormick?
Well, I think so, because there's obviously cases where we've got retaining walls for things like flower beds, or even, you know, edges of larger green areas, and there are numerous examples I can think of all over the borough where nothing seems to be being done, and residents get almost resigned to the fact in many cases that they're paying ground rent in some cases for private companies that are just getting away with doing nothing.
Yeah, I suppose the maintenance of private property is one thing, but to meet a test for an untidy site if there's a flower bed that's or a retaining wall on a flower bed that's needs maintaining, that wouldn't be the test for an untidy site as such. It's more around private land being maintained to the standard that one might expect, where people pay for that service, and so the accountability of those particular management companies as organisations that residents pay into.
Thank you, Greg. Did you want one very final quick?
Well, I'm a bit disturbed by that because really, we've got cases, and it's almost like we've got statutory powers, and we're not using them as a council, and we're trying to justify them by saying they're not applicable. So, oh, it's a retaining wall, it's not a building, oh, it's not a piece of public, amenity land or parkland or whatever. But there are numerous cases where we've got. I can think of one in Winklebury, for instance, where we've got a piece of land that's surrounded by retaining walls and they're cracking and nobody's doing anything with them. I can think of examples in Brighton Hill where we've got walls that are falling down where it's unsafe for local residents, either driving cars where there should be retaining walls and they're missing, or paths where there's private land and these guys are paying ground rent, not doing it. It just seems to me that we've been ducking this issue as a council, and we're ducking this issue now by saying, oh, it's not applicable and it's not our responsibility or whatever. And that I find really annoying, because I think these things are going to end up coming to a head, and we'll be going to have cases come before DC as a result of this, because we've got numerous cases of neglect in the borough, and we don't seem to be addressing the problem.
Can I leave that one there and just ask you to note that, please, Greg, and the concerns? I think they're widely shared by a number of the councillors around this table. Councillor Ganesh, we've come to the end of the section. Do you want to sum up? Any final comments from you?
Thank you, Chair. I think it was a good discussion around an important issue for a lot of the residents within the borough, and had some great recommendations in terms of building up towards the adoption, which can be formalised after speaking to the team. And I also recognise the vacant positions around the green space officer, open space officer, and the infrastructure monitoring officer. And within all our means, we as a service trying everything to get those filled and get those 100 cases moving forward to solve or bring to the standard as it should be before adoption within the borough. And I hope we will be picking up on the points that Councillor Walks mentioned, and should be able to get back to Councillor Walks at some point with some of the answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ganesh. Thank you, Greg. I should also say, I forgot to say thank you to Councillor Carr and Kate Randall for their earlier comments. If you're watching belatedly, thank you for that. Okay, it is coming up to 8:45, so we've been here for just over 2 hours. Can I suggest we take a break until 8:50 and then come back and finish off the session? Thank you. Right, are we all right to start? Yeah, yeah. Okay, thank you all for coming back. Agenda item 7 now, which is the update for the EPH committee around the water cycle study. We don't have a portfolio holder to speak to this, but we do have 2 visiting speakers. So can I welcome up to the table, first of all, please, Jackie Brown. Jackie, you have 2 minutes. I'll let you know when there's 30 seconds of your time remaining, and that 2 minutes starts as soon as you press the button on your microphone and start speaking.
There's insufficient time to go through the planning department's report, but it's worth recapping on the reasons for the way forward and importance of addressing these prior to publication of Reg 18. Arken's independent water cycle study review concludes that it lacks technical detail and is not a rigorous scientific assessment of potential impacts of future housing and population growth on the water environment. EA guidance requires assessment of evidence gaps. The WCS did not adequately identify and consider evidence gaps, nor adequate or arguably any evaluation of the critical uncertainties in its findings and strategies developed. The study itself recommends that the potential impact on phosphate load in the nearby River Test SSSI is investigated further by the water company before significant new growth is permitted in the catchment. Not all treatment works discharge permits are set to maintaining the current water framework status of the receiving water body. Some permits, if operated to full flow limit, could lead to significant deterioration in water quality and possibly WFD status. Minor increase in flux would reduce the status to good, contravening SS4 of the current plan and precluding against future development. These statements give no confidence that the proposed levels of development can be accommodated without significant environmental harm. The Stand report concludes some deficiencies in overall conclusions. Further investigation is required prior to any issue of the new local plan, since these considerations will affect decisions re site locations and housing numbers.
Thank you very much. Right, we'll reset that. And can I ask our final visiting speaker, Dave George, please, to come to the table? Dave, you also have 2 minutes. I'll let you know when there's 30 seconds of your time remaining. So please switch on your microphone and your 2 minutes will start as soon as you begin speaking.
Thank the officers for the report. Thank you. It's been 6 months since the EPH committee recommended the way forward. Jackie Brown has just ably set out the limitations to the water cycle study and reminded us of the recommendation of actions to be taken before Regulation 18. I think you agree that the update demonstrates rather modest concrete progress to date. Decisions seem to be taken to delay items until Regulation 18, or it appears not to be taken forward at all. Certainly, this is not what I anticipated when we made these recommendations. I'm concerned we'll be much in the same position in September 2023 on the issues as we were in September 2022. And the Regulation ALPU will be based upon the same flawed assumptions and widely discredited infrastructure delivery expectations. Avant Borough Council have recently acted on such concerns and appointed a consultant to challenge Southern Water the information the information they give them. They obviously see the need and benefit of doing this. The reasons for needing urgent action on these items is that if we cannot have confidence in the delivery of required infrastructure, we will need strong policies to protect the environment and our communities. Whilst these may be challenged at Regulation 18, it will be up to the vested interest to explain why the policies are inappropriate. We need the work done under this way forward to be able to argue our case. Glossing things over would merely facilitate continued mismanagement of the environment. In September, the idea of a task and finish group to strengthen the policies was mooted. This is something possibly the EPH consider taking forward to try and strengthen some of those policies. We would very much welcome meeting with the portfolio holder, the planning department, and if appropriate, interested members of the committee to review what should be done and how we can help to take this programme forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave. Okay, Councillor Cubitt.
Can I ask a question of the visiting speaker, please?
I have been told by officers that we can't, when speakers come purely as speakers, we can't ask them questions.
Is that not just in the discretion of the chairman?
I'm told it's part of the constitution.
The rules of debate, the procedures are set out on page 4.55 of the Constitution, that just sets out the procedure of the meetings, and it doesn't include questions of visiting speakers. It's not included in the Constitution.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Cubitt. I did ask that question myself as well, which is why the officers come prepared with a response. What I would say, though, in response to David George's comment about the motion is I'm minded to suggest a motion that we create a task and finish group about this. I'm not going to set that forward just yet, but please do think about that as you're asking questions throughout this paper to see whether you think it would make sense for us, if the questions aren't sufficiently answered tonight, whether it would make sense for us to set up a task and finish group specifically on this issue. So I propose we go through this question by question. We've got Councillor Ganesh here as the portfolio holder, plus Joe and Anne offering officer expert guidance. So can I ask that we go through, beginning with the first question, please. So work to reduce the total number of homes to be delivered on the basis of inadequate environmental capacity. Any questions or comments on that one, please? Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Casting my mind back and looking at this, as far as I understood, the water cycle study certainly did not say that there was a need to reduce it. But what it didn't say was explained in the fact that there was going to be a lack of fresh water supply, there was going to be rationing, there were going to be water management features, there were going to be so many things on top of the sewage and that it actually the logical step, the if you like, the stating the obvious, we are in trouble, and we can't just say because it did not say that. It did say there would be severe problems for residents and challenges. It was not being particularly helpful, so I still think that question remains very critical and unanswered, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tomlin. Do officers or portfolio holder want to respond to that? Thank you, and does that answer your question, Councillor Tomlin?
Well, yes, it is an answer, but I think this is going to be subject to a lot of debate in the future, because I don't think it's, the right answer. It's an interpretation of what you have given in front of you, but looking deeper at it, I think we're in trouble.
Thank you, Councillor Tomlin. Councillor Cubitt.
Yes, thank you very much. Right, in terms of this specific point alone, it's dancing on a pinhead, because in the water cycle study throughout, it says that there won't be a detrimental impact, etc., as long as the required infrastructure solutions are delivered. Or it concludes that there are feasible solutions to ensure that things don't deteriorate. Or it says we can have demand management and basically effectively ration water. So if you were to invert the question and say if those feasible solutions weren't practical or cost available, or if the infrastructure wasn't able to be delivered, then by inference the number of homes will have to be reduced. So I think I don't like this response. I don't think it's accurate, and I think the point that David George and Jackie made were very well made, which is that it is essential that our policies are strong and robust and established before we proceed to Reg 18, in order to ensure that we don't end up where we are at the moment, where we have trajectory of water status going down, and yet we still can't exercise SS4 and stop any further building. So, I mean, there's no point in this council being an ostrich and parking its head in the sand. We have got a problem. The water cycle study has identified a problem. The water cycle study 1 identified a problem, and the water cycle study 2 identified a problem. And of course, yes, if all the infrastructure is provided, there isn't a problem, but who's going to provide the infrastructure? And we have to be absolutely confident that that infrastructure will be provided before we permit these sites to go forward to the next stage.
Thank you, Councillor Cubitt. The officers want to respond to that.
I'll just say briefly, the water resource management plans that have been agreed and the draft ones that are out now or have been out recently are rigorously scrutinised by Ofwat, the Environment Agency, the Drinking Water Inspectorate, before being approved by Secretary of State. So there's quite a rigorous process for that. The number of options that they've considered, and they're very technical documents that consider various options. They've also got a number of different pathways, so they've got 9 pathways to allow for different scenarios, so to allow for different population growth forecasts, to allow for climate change that could be unpredictable. So whilst they are setting a particular path now, this is their 50-year plans, but they're reviewed every 5 years, so the pathway could be amended if climate change or population growth figures suggest that it's needed to. Yes, it is recognised that it is an area of severe water stress, but that's across the whole region, hence why we now have a draft regional plan that considers it on a regional basis.
Thank you, Anne. I think the challenge you've got is that there are a number of us around this table who are incredibly sceptical of the water company's ability to actually deliver based on previous experience. I appreciate you sort of responding, but I don't think that that's going to persuade us just because of the history of what we've all experienced and what our residents have experienced. Okay, any more questions or comments on question 1? Yes, Councillor Katecha.
Just wanted to ask regards to the housing in this sort of basin, water basin. What sort of technologies can they use when they're building those houses to make sure it doesn't affect the environment or the actual rivers, etc.? Have you looked at new technology regards that?
Is this individual houses or wastewater treatment works?
Basically, when they're sort of doing a site, basically, so individual houses and the actual treatment
area. Yes, overall, yeah.
I'm not quite sure on that. In terms of wastewater treatment works, I know that there are traditional ways of treating wastewater, but they are encouraged, and I know they are looking at alternative ways that might be putting less chemicals in, but more natural processes such as wetlands. But there's various different feasibilities of how that could work.
A quick supplementary, of course. Sorry, I didn't make it clear. I know that. So I'm going to say that, for example, let's say you're flushing the toilet or over in a shower. Would there be any sort of technology where it can be recycled so it doesn't affect the level of water or it doesn't affect the environment? That's what I meant as well.
Yeah, and when they were looking at water neutrality options in the water cycle study, there was things suggested as rainwater harvesting and yeah, recycling suggestions like that. Obviously, there are cost implications for developers and yeah, developing new houses, but that was looked at.
Thank you, Councillor Cubitt.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I'm actually going back to an earlier point because I want clarity from the Executive Director. I'm reading the Constitution, and she explicitly said that we are not permitted to ask visitors questions. And I'm reading, and I've read the rules of debate, and I'm looking at 4.55, amended 20 January 2023, 11A, 1 to 4, B, C, D, E, F. And I have to say, Executive Director, I would like a little bit more clarity from you as to where in any of those sections it says that we are not allowed to, we're not permitted to ask a question of a visiting speaker, especially an authoritative expert like Dave George.
So, on page 4.55, Rule 11, Rules of Debate, Section A sets out the procedure for the meeting, and what I said was it's not included within that procedure.
I have great respect for you, but I have to say, from a legal interpretation, and I will read it for the public, it says for each substantive item of business, the following order will normally apply. Normally apply. 1, introduction of report by chair, cabinet member, officer, or visiting speaker as appropriate. Number 2, presentation if required. Number 3, contributions by visiting councillors to the chair. Number 4, contributions and discussions by members of the committee. It does not, in any section of 11A, nor in the subsequent sections, does it imply that we are not permitted to ask a visiting member, or a visiting person, a visitor, a question.
Can I just cut that off there? I think what we'll do, in the interest of time, I'm conscious it's sort of 9:10 now. I don't want to have a debate about the Constitution. What I will do, I will stick with the officer's recommendation of not asking any questions of the speaker. But if we decide as a committee that we want to go ahead and create a task and finish group, then I would hope that task and finish group would wish to speak to Councillor George and pick his brains on the subject on which, as you rightly say, he is an expert.
I thank you for that, and in the interest of expediency, I will support you, but I think it is very clear from the legal words that I'm reading that we have been misguided by the Executive Director, and I would like some update because it is explicitly not state that I cannot, or any of us cannot, ask a visitor questions, and it seems to me that an overinterpretation and a misguidance has taken place, and I think that's quite serious because this is an overview and scrutiny committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cubitt. I will ask the officers, if I may, that we come back and look at this, and if necessary, if we need to get a report from the head of law and governance, so we can have consistency both within this meeting and within other meetings as well. Okay, so that's question 1. Any questions or comments on question 2?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, can that also be formally recorded that we were not permitted because we were misguided by the Executive Director? We were not allowed to ask questions. I'd like that in the minutes, please.
Okay, question 2. Rethinking the spatial strategy to place less demand and impact on those areas most vulnerable to water supply and wastewater impacts. Any questions or comments on that, please? Nope. Question 3. Undertaking a competent scientific assessment of the impacts of the proposed changes to wastewater treatment works, particularly phosphates, before committing to development as recommended in the water cycle study. Yes, Councillor Cuban.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate what you're doing, and I appreciate that we don't have a lot of time. And I also don't want to repeat in each paragraph what I've said in the preamble, which is we have a problem with water. We don't have enough water. Our aquifers haven't got enough water. We have a problem with lack of infrastructure. We have a problem with the EA failing to do its duties because it hasn't been funded properly by the government. We have, and it affects and it weaves its way through all of this, the challenges of future water supply. And whilst this paper is interesting, it doesn't address any of the problems, and you've alluded to possibly a task and finish to address these issues, because what's very, very clear is it's absolutely essential we do not proceed to Reg 18 until the answers have been found to these very serious questions. So I don't know what the rest of the members feel, because I'm sure they don't want to hear me repeat in each section what I say in the previous ones. How we proceed, because the phosphates, it's the same issue, the water supply, it's the same issue, the spatial strategies and the infrastructure, it's the same issues. It's the same theme that's applied across the board.
Okay, I appreciate where you're coming from. In that case, what I will do, I will ask members if they have any questions or comments on any of the sections within here. So if you can please take a look through the next few pages all the way up to and including page 76. And let me know if you have any questions. And what we'll do thereafter is I will then propose the motion for setting up a task and finish group, and we can take it from there. So I've got questions from Councillor Tomlin, Councillor Watts, and anyone else? Councillor Cubitt as well. Okay. So Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. It's a general comment, and I think the section is the phosphates. Phosphates generated by housing passing into the water. Currently, in our DCC planning, when we see offsetting going on, we have got this situation where developers now don't have to take land of a comparable size to turn it over into taking it out of agriculture. The other method is to basically spend some money down with Eastleigh Borough Council as an offsetting thing. I think the whole thing is very unsatisfactory, and I think we need to drill to the bottom of this for going forward with our plan. That these these nitrate offsets and the mechanisms are too easy, and I don't think are addressing the total problem. And I think somewhere along the line we need to capture that, whether it's in this particular question, but I think that's something we must flag up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tomlin. The officers or the portfolio holder would like to respond to that, or are you just happy to acknowledge it? Okay, Councillor Watts.
Yes, at bottom page 73, policy N5, developments will respect and enhance special qualities of our rivers, and that isn't really happening at the moment, is it? We have evidence from visitors tonight, and that this local plan that's coming up, that's going to have detrimental effect on our rivers. I just wonder if there's any legal position that this council can take if water companies do not fulfil their obligations and they continue to contaminate our rivers, whether we can have some sort of policy. I know the Environment Agency is to monitor it and everything, but we have firm policies, and I'd like to investigate whether we can actually get something legally in a development sort of policy that could maybe fine these water companies, if that's possible.
Any thoughts from officers, or is that something you need to go away and investigate further?
That's really for the Environment Agency. They monitor it and they enforce it, and there are fines, and I've understood that they have been increased.
really adequate. I mean, the Environment Agency issues licences, the water companies flout them, and our rivers get more and more polluted. So the whole enforcement regime isn't tight enough. And maybe it's something as a council we could look at and see whether we can get any powers. I know that's the way it is at the moment. Maybe we could lobby government and say we need more enforcement and more regulation.
Thank you, Councillor Watts. Before I go to Councillor Ganesh, I would say as well, one of the questions I had, or one of the points I wanted to raise, it's mentioned repeatedly here that we've tried to invite the Environment Agency to come to speak to us to one of our meetings, and they keep delaying it. So I'd just like to reinforce that. I think it would be incredibly helpful if we could arrange them to come to speak to us, and so we can have this debate properly with them, as they're the ones who are responsible for this. Councillor Ganesh.
Thank you, Chair. I think the Councillor Watts' points are very important points. It's not just our borough. There are the many boroughs around the region are having issues with water companies not complying with the regulations and getting away with it, which is something that we have highlighted in the past with the number of Secretary of States, and we have written to them, and we have got some responses, and our neighbouring MP, or one of the borough's MP, Ranil Javadhan, when he was Secretary of State, he had written to water companies, and he had asked them for face-to-face meetings, and where he insisted about the lots of the issues, including our boroughs. So this is an ongoing work, and as some of the officers mentioned, that this is something that EI monitor, which is something we would like to engage with EI and see if there's a way that we can influence on the way that they manage these water companies. And I would like to explore if there's a way that we can bring, or if there's a way we can think of a policy within our the local plan that can influence it. I'm not sure, I'm not guaranteeing anything, but I would like to explore the options if there's a way that we can come up with a policy that can ask water companies to do more rather than depending on the national government or the EA to monitor or evaluate them and follow up with that. Thank you, Chair.
Portfolio holder, Councillor Cubitt.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ganesh, for being in listening mode. We were a co-signatory of a statement of common ground. And I don't know, is there a legal implication to a statement of common ground? It was a submission to the planning inspector when our local plan was approved between us, and we were co-signatories with the Environment Agency and with Thames Water. And we made significant numbers of undertakings. And on the basis of those undertakings that we co-signed with Thames Water and the Environment Agency, together with the undertakings in the current local plan, that we, in partnership with the Environment Agency, the water companies and Natural England, would monitor the river every year and adhere to the obligations that we committed to protect, manage and improve the water quality. So that's all there, and then we have the section SS4, which was overlaid on top of it, so that we could use that policy to say, sorry mate, can't build anymore because you, or we, as the co-signatories of the Statement of Common Ground, haven't done what we've done. But we haven't done that. We haven't used that in that way. So we have failed on every single level. Now, what it says in this document is we can't evaluate what infrastructure is needed because that's the water company's duty, and we then say it's not for us to make a realistic assessment of deliverability. We then also go on to say that we've requested to meet a high-level meeting at the Environment Agency, and we haven't had that, even though they're the co-signatories of the Statement of Common Ground. That was the basis on which, to a very great degree, our plan was approved by the inspector. So we then have a situation this year alone, in the month of January, where Thames Water has dumped raw sewage into the River Loddon 4 times, and on January the 16th it dumped raw sewage for 20 hours into the River Loddon, and that was in this month of January. So I have to say that I think the council is already accountable because they were co-signatories of the Statement of Common Ground, and they have got commitment, and they are in partnership with the Environment Agency and with Thames Water. So on the basis of what's happened to date, it doesn't fill me with very much confidence that we proceed to Reg 18 on a promise that this infrastructure is going to get delivered, because history tells us that we failed to monitor, we the council have failed to monitor because we have a commitment in the plan to do so. We promised all these commitments in the Statement of Common Ground, and yet we presided over a degradation in the quality of the water, and there's obviously huge issues with regards to river test, which I'm equally passionate about, which wasn't even covered in the last plan, and water sources. So there's two things. Firstly, I was wondering whether we as members would be prepared to put forward a motion to the Cabinet, because obviously we can only make recommendations, saying that we recommend that this council does not proceed to Reg 18 until it is confident that the infrastructure deficit and the water supply issues have been clearly resolved and identified. And I don't think that's an unfair request or an unfair recommendation to make to the Cabinet, because on the basis of the past experiences that we've had, we failed. So I don't know whether members would support that.
Before we test that level of support, Councillor Ganesh, do you want to respond to any of those comments?
Thank you, Councillor Cubitt. I don't want to repeat the same thing I've said. As this is something that EA has been monitoring, and we have been working with EA. And as part of this process, we were meant to meet with EA late last year, but which was cancelled, and we are planning. There is some work being done in terms of engaging with EA in order to bring them to the table. So this is an ongoing process, like you said. When they failed, when these water companies failed, that's something need to be addressed, and that's exactly something that, as a like you said, as a co-signatory of this, we will be insisting with EA. Thank you.
Councillor Cubitt, do you still want to proceed with that motion?
Sorry. I mean, it wasn't planned, but if someone's prepared to second me, I'd love to take it to the vote.
Yeah, I'm prepared to second that.
Okay. Do we want to go for a motion, or are we happy just to agree as a committee that we want a motion? Okay, fine. So can you just for the record, Councillor Cubitt, just restate what your motion is, please?
Right. That we, the committee, recommend to Cabinet that this council does not proceed to Reg 18 until all of the outstanding issues in relation to infrastructure requirements and/or infrastructure requirements are clearly identified in relation to water problems in all three of the water bodies: the River Test, the River Loddon, and the Embourne.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cubitt. Just looking at officers, is that a valid motion? Any issues with that? No. Okay. In that case, we've got a proposer. We've got a seconder. If you are in favour of the motion, can you raise your hand, please, now? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. That motion is carried. Councillor
Sorry. Thank you. So in relation to the policy, I'm very pleased to see the officers adding the Test and the Embourne. I'm not. Sorry. Is the Itchen in our water courses? It's in Winchester. Anyway, yes, I'm happy for the Itchen. I love the Itchen as well. I love all of them. So I pass. Anyway, but what I would like to see, and I don't know, Mr. Chairman, if this is the right place to the wording to be changed. Development proposals will conserve and enhance the special qualities of the river corridors and their tributaries. Then I would also like to see development that is within or adjacent to the River Loddon, Test or Embourne catchment, so corridors deleted and catchment inserted, and their tributaries will be required to protect, insert, protect, conserve and enhance, And then one other amendment is where it says the river corridors ecosystem, I would like to read the river catchments ecosystem. So if those amendments could be acknowledged and taken on board, I'd be very grateful.
We will make a note of those and leave it to the portfolio holder to decide. Thank you, Councillor Cubitt. Following the question on this section, Councillor McCormick.
I think there's a common theme emerging here in terms of lack of public confidence in water companies to deliver the required improvements to make sure that, number one, we have adequate water supply, number two, we don't have sewage effluent. So my question is really about public accountability, because the water companies aren't really publicly accountable, and the only way I could see a water company being publicly accountable is frankly for us to renationalise water, because at the moment water companies have private monopoly. You can't choose your water company. All you can do in terms of choice is have a water meter installed or not. So my question is to the portfolio holder, will you make the necessary representations either to this government or to the next about ensuring we have the proper public accountability of water companies? Because at the moment they can just say, oh yeah, we'll do it. We've got no means of examining that and being able to hold them up to scrutiny to see if they're actually capable of delivering. And in terms of the local plan, that means, for instance, with the golf course, that we've passed an outline planning application for 1,000 homes in the golf course, and it can't be built because we don't have the capacity for sewage, and we're looking at the absurd notion of pumping the sewage up over Kempshire Hill, down the other side, and laying a massive sewer main down the A30 in order to accommodate a few extra houses. And that will need to happen just so that we can implement what we've already given outline plan permission for the golf course. What about many down south? What about the other schemes associated with it? You know, we are in a real bind, and at the moment all the water company says, yeah, we'll do it, and we don't have any evidence they actually are doing what they've already got commitments to with existing planning applications, let alone what we're wanting to do in the forthcoming revised local plan.
Thank you, Councillor McCormick. Before I give Councillor Ganesh a chance to respond, I'm conscious we're about a minute away from 9:30. So do I have the committee's permission to suspend standing orders with a view to wrapping this up by 10 o'clock? So an extra half hour? Agreed. Thank you very much. Councillor Ganesh?
Thank you, Chair. I'll be quick. As I mentioned before, I think this is something that we have been engaging with EA, and we insist on what we want as a borough. So what I can suggest is this is something that we will be picking up with the plan meeting with EA, and officers, if there's anything to add on to that.
My only point to make is that I do completely understand why, you know, the lack of confidence. But I think there have been improvements, and the requirement now to have drainage and wastewater management plans makes it more accountable. The current ones that are being drafted now aren't statutory, but the next ones will be. But again, it's making it like the water resource management plans, that they're setting out what they're going to do, and they'll have to do progress reports and then see what's going to be done. It's all set out to inform their asset management planning. So I do appreciate the lack of confidence, but I think there have been improvements since the last plan to make it more accountable and transparent.
Thank you, Anne. Is that a supplementary there? Andy?
I'm not sure really that the current proposals, although there may be an incremental improvement on what went previously, go far enough. I guess the portfolio holder answer, you mentioned the EA, but I mean, it's more a question of will you take the fight to the water companies and try and get the government to do that as well? Because the way I see it is the water companies take money off the public and then just go when it comes to giving meaningful commitments that give public confidence to the service that they expect.
Councillor Ganesh, do you want to respond to that?
Thank you, Chair. I think the lack of confidence on water companies is very obvious. This is exactly why we've been engaging with EA and the Secretary of State a number of times and reiterating the point, as a borough, we would like to get what we deserve as a borough. So we have been working our end in terms of how do we get the best from ES point as well as Secretary of State a number of times. But going back to the point about how do we make it work, if there's a way, we should explore. If there's a way, we go a bit further and see if there's anything that we can put in as part of our policy or the local plan to make sure that we can make these water companies accountable. We should, and I will be asking the officers to do that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor McIntyre.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so my point is on the section of the report, funnily enough, that the portfolio holder was talking about holding the high-level meetings with the Environment Agency. And far be it from me to understand what their workload is, but they obviously seem very busy at the moment to speak to us. We know what they would say anyway. I think they came out in November last year where they stressed the urgency in needing to improve chalk stream conditions. Are we able to, well, I suppose we are able, it's in our own powers, whilst we're waiting for the EA to come back to us, why don't we take actions into our own hands? So why don't we begin discussions with Hampshire County Council about a local nature recovery strategy for our rivers? Why don't we engage CABA, the catchment-based approach, who are running a strategy right now on how we improve our they've actually produced a chalk stream restoration strategy, so we can actually go to these outside bodies who seem to be a step ahead of the Environment Agency and quite literally 10 steps ahead of the water companies. I think that's most probably the best action that we can take whilst we're waiting for these other bodies to get back to us. Thank you.
Councillor Ganesh.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor McIntyre. I think it's a very good point. We should be working on the areas where we can achieve or where we can fix things, like you suggested. If there's a way we can engage with the Hampshire County Council or any other bodies, or if there's a way that we can engage with water companies directly in order to sort of get the best outcome for the borough or make the chalk streams safe. We should be working on that, and I will ask the officers to go and explore if there's a way that we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you, portfolio holder. A final question from Councillor Cubitt.
Sorry, just thank you very much for your commitments, Cabinet Member. Just very quickly, it's great to talk about third parties, voluntary areas, CABAs, all that stuff. That's great. Right, and we all are hoping, and we're already dialoguing with all those organisations already. The point is, in the local plan, the policy will be monitored by the Environment Agency, water companies and the council through a detailed monitoring plan to ensure compliance with the Water Framework Directive and the relevant basin management group. So that, yes, it's great for those to happen, but we have obligations, as I said already, in the Statement of Common Ground and in our plan, and those are obligations we have to meet. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I've mentioned several times this evening about potentially setting up a task and finish group for this to look at exactly what we can do in terms of looking at the water cycle study and how that feeds into the local plan policies. I'm now going to formally move a motion to that effect. Does anybody wish to second that? Councillor McCormick. Thank you very much. Is that everything? Enough officers to move? Okay. So. Councillor James, very quickly.
And urge that it is implemented and starts very quickly. We don't want to mess around. We need to move quickly in relation to the setting up of and the work of that group.
Yeah. I think I don't have any issues with that. I think there may be the more practical challenge of doing that is that there are several members sat around here who face election this year, and therefore they may during that period. Yeah. Yeah, but let's see what we can do. Councillor Ganesh.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is something that we should probably speak to Democratic Service. If there's a way we can start quicker as possible, like you suggested, we should. But if there's anything stop us from doing it, Democratic Service might be able to get back to us. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Ganesh. You've obviously assumed in that question that we are going to pass this motion, which I suspect we are, but we ought to put it to a formal vote. So who is in support of this motion? Lovely. Unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, that's agenda item 7 finished. Councillor Ganesh, do you want to say any final words in terms of summing up?
Thank you so much, the committee, with a number of valuable input. And as I mentioned, as a borough, we should be engaging with any bodies that could make the outcome better for the borough. And I have committed on engaging with a number of bodies, and I will be getting back to you and updating at some point in future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ganesh. Thank you also as well to Anne and to Joe, who I think have had to defend the indefensible tonight, but you've had a good go at it. I really appreciate you taking the time to answer our questions. So thank you very much, all of you, for that. Okay, we move on to item 8, which is the recommendation tracker for EPH. This is an item just for noting. If anyone has any questions or comments on that, now is your opportunity. I don't think there's anything particularly controversial on there, so I'm hoping we can move on from that relatively quickly, but you have a chance should you wish to mention anything on that. Councillor McCormick, yeah.
I can't resist asking this question on minute reference number 2722, Leisure Park Master Plan. Is it appropriate for the committee to maybe commence a piece of work looking at the latest proposals with Great Wolf and the potential there to have a rival attraction to the Aquadrome next door to it, which to me seems to put that proposal on a collision course with the master plan where we're looking to rebuild the Aquadrome?
Thank you, Councillor McCormick. It's funny you should say that, because as part of the next agenda item, I was going to propose another motion for another task and finish group to look at not just that, but the whole leisure park plans in general. And the context of this is not just the announcement of the potential resort next to the leisure park, but also the decision by Cabinet on Monday to proceed with the master plan as it currently stands, despite serious concerns raised by the scrutiny committee during a call-in meeting last month. At that meeting, the relevant portfolio holder said he would be potentially open to the idea of working with a task and finish group if one was created by one of the policy committees. So I was going to propose that we do exactly that and create one of these committees to work with the portfolio holder on the plans for the leisure park, and I think that would also, I would hope, would be the scope would be wide enough to cover the adjacent development, which, as you say, does perhaps raise more questions than answers at this stage. Any thoughts on that? Thank you very much, Councillor James. Anyone else wish to speak in favour or against the motion? No. In that case, we're just looking at officers to make sure that's all valid. Yep. Let's put that to the vote. All in favour? That is unanimous as well. Thank you very much. Okay, so that's item number 8 covered. Item number 9 is the work programme. So obviously we've got today, which we've managed to get through relatively quickly. We've got the next meeting on the 13th of July. I don't propose talking too much about this really, because obviously it's the other side of the elections, and who knows who'll be on this committee then. But if anyone has any comments or thoughts on that, please feel free to raise your hand. No. Okay, in that case, I think we're in a position to wrap up. So thank you all for your time. Thank you for keeping it brief. It's 20 to 10, so we've done a reasonable job on this. So at 20 to 10, I confirm that this meeting is closed. Thank you.